11.9 Happiness and Ethics. Very often when people talk about religion or religious practice, they use the expression religion and ethics. The development of happiness is inextricably linked to improving one's life, to improving society, and to developing other aspects of spiritual practice. In this context, it is necessary to state that the development of happiness is equivalent to the development of ethics, and conversely, ethical development is equivalent to the cultivation of happiness. If one can understand this connection, then one will understand the true meaning both of ethics and of happiness. When people hear the word ethics or morality, they often get the sense of acting against one's will. For example, when speaking about ethics, people often think of needing to refrain from certain harmful or evil behavior, which give the sense of force or constraint. In truth, ethical development is one aspect of developing happiness. True ethics belongs to the ethics of happiness. If ethics is merely a system of going against one's will, or is tied up with suffering, then it is not true ethics. It will not lead to true success. This is not to say that ethics does not involve some form of restraint and self-control. It does involve constraint, which there are two kinds. Number one, early stages of practice may involve some constraint in the same way that positive growth may require the removal of negative qualities. Yet, when one enters the correct path and one's ethical conduct is true, growth is unhindered. Negative qualities fall away, and one need not spend time removing them. Positive qualities increase to the state of completion, at which point one's life is fully devoted to sharing goodness with others. Number two, the second form of constraint is related to personal disposition. There are some people referred to as engaging in difficult, arduous practice, dukkha patipada, whose disposition it is to be forceful in practice, yet their willingness and eagerness for constraint leads to self-discipline. Instead of suffering about constraint, they delight in training. They have the potential to grow and succeed. Ethics overlaps with spiritual training. According to the Buddha's teachings, human beings require spiritual training. They only reach excellence and nobility by way of training. Spiritual training is equivalent to spiritual development. People reach spiritual success by way of training themselves. This is an aspect of human nature. One cannot progress by simply following one's raw instincts. For this reason, one can see that spiritual training is linked to human nature. People can only grow and prosper by engaging in spiritual training. If spiritual training unfolds correctly, it must be endowed with happiness, and it must be a training of happiness. If people are unhappy while engaging in such practice, it can be assumed that they are not training correctly. When people engage in spiritual training, their lives undergo development and increase in virtue and wholesomeness. This life of virtue and rectitude is referred to as ethical conduct, Buddhadhamma. Ethics and spiritual training thus must go hand in hand. In fact, one need not use the term must here, because when people practice correctly, these two elements naturally proceed in unison. When people engage in correct spiritual training, their lives improve and they experience greater happiness. Spiritual training is thus a cultivation in happiness. Moreover, every aspect of a person's life will be developed. It is in this way that these factors are connected. Spiritual training is the development of happiness. Spiritual training is equivalent to ethical development. Development in ethics is the cultivation of happiness, etc. It is, as the Buddha said, if one attends to the correct causes and conditions, one need not make an appeal. The dynamics of nature will proceed automatically. When rapture piti arises, the body and mind are refreshed and relaxed. One need not ask for this to happen, or even to have this intention. Relaxation, passaddhi, then follows naturally, according to things being just so. If a mother hen wishes for chicks to hatch, she incubates the eggs. At the proper time, the chicks peck through the eggshell and emerge. Yet, if the hen does not sit on the eggs, despite clucking loudly all day in front of the coop, her efforts will be in vain. The eggs will rot and no chicks will appear. Soon after the Second World War, technology was not as advanced as it is today. And before people could get in a car and drive away, they would have to use all their strength to turn the hand crank. Sometimes they would be utterly exhausted by the time the engine turned over. Nowadays, however, one only need turn one's fingers an inch on the ignition and the engine starts. Here we see both the connection and the distinction between human processes and the processes of nature. If we are to benefit from the processes of nature, then we must seek ways for them to complement human activities. The amount of strain and difficulty we experience depends on how well we can link our activities to natural processes and have these take over for us. If people are able to set up their activities effectively and link them with dynamics of nature, they will abide in joy and at ease. If people can accomplish this, they will not have to act against their will. There will be no need for other people or for the government to exert pressure on them to act. Our responsibility is simply to discern causes and conditions and to then respond to them correctly. We need neither appeal to things to be a specific way nor to resist them. There are some people who, rather than resist the process of nature, try to regulate their desires. They wholeheartedly practice self-restraint, and this restraint eventually becomes a form of self-training. This is another natural unfolding. Spiritual training is a way of developing people in happiness and in other virtuous qualities. When they live a virtuous life, they live an ethical life. This is how ethics and training are defined in Buddhism. Here we use the term Buddhism simply as a means for communication. If Buddhism teaches the truth, then it teaches nature. It teaches how things naturally exist, how things exist according to their own nature. A simple definition for Buddhism is thus a teaching of natural truths. In sum, for spiritual training or ethical development to be true and effective, it must include a cultivation of happiness. Spiritual training and ethical development are synonymous with the development of happiness. If spiritual training is still accompanied by a lack of enthusiasm and resistance, one will be unable to experience happiness. This is not genuine training, and its associated ethical discipline will be endowed with force and compulsion. Likewise, this is not true ethical conduct. A. Human regulations and a system of preconditions. Many people harbor the misunderstanding that by inciting craving and increasing greed, people will work harder in order to obtain consumable goods. They claim that such excess will spur the economy and lead to greater wealth for all. At first glance, this appears to be true, but those people do not see things correctly and are thus mistaken. Thinking in this way reveals a certain intelligence in engaging with craving within a system of preconditions. Yet, however skilled one is in manipulating craving, it is almost impossible that such a method of thinking will create someone like Albert Einstein. The best it can do is produce technocrats working in business economics who may create excitement or alarm as a result of their research, which is often not of great consequence. For problems to be truly solved, people need to possess wholesome enthusiasm to match their intelligence. Take a simple example from everyday life of looking after one's physical body. One person endowed with wholesome enthusiasm, Chanda, see the earlier section on different kinds of desire, cares for his body, wishing for it to be strong, healthy, and clean. Another person subject to craving is prone to laziness and does not normally show concern for the body. Later, when craving kicks in and he wants to appear enticing to someone else, he will try to make himself as physically attractive as possible. Which of these two forms of behavior will be more conducive to the well-being of the body? Now let us turn our attention to the system of preconditions required for engagement with craving. Earlier, a distinction between the process of wholesome desire and the process of craving was described. In the process of craving, a fixed sense of self or self-identity arises. Now we come to a second distinction. When craving acts as the motivation for action, it creates a system of preconditions that acts as the driving force for society. It is also the mechanism behind unsustainable development. When craving arises, people want to consume something, But when the object has not yet been obtained, they look for ways to acquire it. Here, things do not unfold according to the process of causes and conditions, but rather they link up with a set of preconditions. People may object here and say, craving is also a desire for action. But this is not so. Craving prefers idleness. Craving wishes to consume, to obtain, to acquire. But if the desired object has not yet been obtained, what can one do? Here one must accord with the stipulation. In order to get this, one must do that. One cannot obtain the desired object without acting in this particular way. This is how craving prompts activity within a system of preconditions. Here, one acts not out of wholesome enthusiasm, but because the action is a prerequisite for obtaining something. As the action is not a response to a true wish to act, the person does not experience happiness. There is not a wholehearted desire to act, and so the action is accompanied by suffering. Craving only spurs action because of preconditions. If one does not act, one does not obtain the desired object, the consumption of which provides happiness. The act itself, however, is done begrudgingly, and one does not know how long one must wait in order to obtain the object and to fulfill gratification. The entire waiting process is filled with suffering. The long wait in order to obtain an object of gratification produces stress. In the end, this process is unsustainable, and rather than leading to true development, it leads to stress. Unsustainable development results in a perpetual state of stress. With wholesome enthusiasm, on the other hand, one wishes to act in order to bring about improvement. One acts with the constant desire to act, and one is thus happy throughout the duration of the deed. One experiences no boredom or stress. This happiness is inherent to this process. It results directly from the existing causes and conditions. This principle applies to one's studies, one's work, indeed to all one's activities. If one acts with wholesome enthusiasm, one will find success and happiness throughout. Wholesome enthusiasm is essential. The Buddha compared it to the light of the dawn. Just like the golden light of the dawn is a precursor to the rising of the sun, so too, if one is endowed with wholesome enthusiasm, it can be expected that one will flourish in spiritual training and in the Noble Eightfold Path. The dynamic of wholesome enthusiasm does not require a lengthy explanation because it follows a natural process according with causes and conditions. Things become complicated because an overlapping system of preconditions set up by human beings. Human beings nowadays are almost entirely dependent on a system based on preconditions. They have used their intelligence to establish conventional measures overlapping with natural laws in order to obtain results based on specific prerequisites. Natural laws, laws of conditionality, exist inherent in nature. Conventional laws are created and subscribed to by human beings in order to meet and proceed according to specific preconditions. These two overlapping laws play an important role in modern civilization. An example of this pertains to the domain of work. Imagine a government complex, for example, a state university, with spacious grounds and elegant buildings. People wish for this to be a place of delight, to have fresh green lawns and parks with various species of flowering shrubs. How should one fulfill this desire? Here people use their intelligence to divide the labor and create a system of agreed-upon standards. We know that trees, plants, and grass thrive when they receive the proper nourishment and nutriments, including water and fertilizer. This pertains to natural causes and conditions, to fixed laws of nature. Knowing this, people then consider how they can propel or induce these natural causes and conditions. Here is where people establish an overlapping set of rules and criteria. Human laws are conventional truths, sammati. They are agreements based on mutual knowledge and recognition. The Pali term sammati refers to a shared understanding combined with a mutual agreement and acknowledgement. Human laws are based on mutual contracts and agreements. For example, one may hire a person for $250 a month to be a gardener in order to water and prune the plants, work the soil, remove weeds, etc., in order for the park to be a place of beauty and delight. Here, rules, i.e., a set of criteria, have been established. The work as a gardener is a precise and definite cause, producing the effect of receiving a monthly salary. The salary appears to be the clear result of working as a gardener. In fact, there are two overlapping laws at work here. Number one, laws of nature. The plants will only grow if there is a sufficiency of various factors like fertilizer and water. These laws are certain and absolute. Number two, human laws. These are secondary laws established to induce the various factors required for the dynamics of nature. These are conventions, regulations, or laws established to create a position of gardener funded by a monthly salary. These human laws deal with human factors. The factors pertaining to human laws help to propel the factors inherent in nature, so they proceed in a way that fulfills the desires of human beings. But as mentioned above, human laws are based on conventional agreements. They are not certain and definite like natural laws. They can be altered, destroyed, or subject to manipulation and deceit. For example, the employer may not honor the agreement and only give the person $200 a month. If the gardener does not consent, he may need to dispute this matter or file a formal complaint. Conversely, the employee may not dedicate himself to the work and instead go off to sleep or go drinking with his friends. Come the end of the month, he demands his salary, but he has not acted in accord with the laws of nature. Here, although he receives $250 or even $300, there is no way for the plants to thrive. Of these two overlapping sets of laws, human laws are subject to distortion. People may not follow through with their promises and agreements. The result is that people get into arguments and are caught up in the stipulations attached to these conventional laws. Such human conventions can thus potentially cause all sorts of problems. They are not truly reliable. The essence of human laws does not rest with the laws themselves, but rather with people. If one wants these laws to be successful, one needs to train people to be honest. In the end, the essential factor is education. People need to learn to love the truth and to abide in honesty. Human laws are based on a system of preconditions. If one works for 1 month as a gardener, one receives $250. This appears to be a clearly defined cause and effect. But what does a closer examination reveal? Working for a month as a gardener cannot in itself produce a salary of $250. The money only comes by way of a proviso. This is an example of a provisional system or a system of preconditions. Some people will only do the work in order to fulfill the preconditions. One may do the gardening work simply to receive the salary, but in one's heart one has no desire for the plants to prosper and grow. If the gardener only desires the result of the human stipulations and is not interested in the direct results of the natural laws, he is not endowed with wholesome desire. He is not interested in the welfare of the plants. He is prompted not by wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, but by craving, tanha. He only wants the money. Craving is the driving force leading the person to act according to the terms within the agreed upon conventions. If the gardener has no true desire for the plants to flourish, he will not love his work. Rather, he will have to force himself to work. The work will thus be burdened with a sense of suffering. This is one of the vital problems for people in the present age. As civilization develops, people's suffering increases. People's work, activities, and education is beset by suffering because they are caught up in the system of preconditions. They are caught up in a system of craving. B. System of preconditions in harmony with natural laws. Craving is normally accompanied by 2 other factors. As a group of 3, these factors are referred to as Buddhadhamma, mental defilements that cause complication, proliferation, and perturbation. Here are simple definitions for these 3 factors. Number 1, tanha, the desire to obtain. Number 2, manha, the desire for prominence. Number 3, ditthi, narrow-mindedness, attachment to personal views and beliefs. These three defilements focus and center on one's sense of self. They are factors of selfishness. They cause problems within a system of preconditions. Whenever they act as the force behind a system of preconditions, they cause all sorts of confusion and turmoil. The problems are not limited to suffering inherent in people's work and education. Every sort of human problem is caused by these defilements, leading to distress and agitation. An awareness of these three defilements enables one to find a solution to problems. The solution lies in applying one's intelligence to find ways for human conventional laws to link up with and support natural laws. Clever people establish conventional laws which help lead natural dynamics in a direction, producing results consistent with their desires and objectives. If we want a tree to grow, then we provide the necessary care, like pruning, watering, and adding fertilizer. Through division of labor, one organizes a gardener to devote his time and effort to this task. One reassures this person that in respect to earning a living, he will be provided with an adequate income. The gardener needs not be anxious and can fully devote himself to this work. In this way, one establishes a bridge between human conventions and natural laws, enabling people to create optimum causes and conditions aligned with natural dynamics. If the gardener possesses wholesome enthusiasm, he wishes to see the plants flourish, and he wants to act in order to bring about this state of completion. If he is reassured about sustaining his livelihood, he can devote himself fully to this task. In this way, he experiences happiness and receives a salary. The work is successful and the worker is happy. In this way, the system of human regulations is coordinated with the causal dynamics of natural laws so that they proceed effectively in line with the wishes of human beings. If, however, the gardener is devoid of wholesome enthusiasm, acting as a catalyst for natural dynamics, the work will not be successful. If he acts simply from craving, desiring only the results promised by a system of preconditions, he will be unhappy because he will have to force himself to work, and the gardening work itself will be unfruitful. If this lack of wholesome enthusiasm is prevalent, all human systems and institutions will be distorted, imbalanced, and corrupted. Work will be unsuccessful and people will be unhappy. Moreover, when people are devoid of wholesome enthusiasm and dominated by craving, they do not exert themselves in their work. They avoid their work and are dishonest and deceitful, giving rise to corruption and waste. The consequence is that one must emphasize secondary systems of supervision and control. When craving takes hold of these systems of supervision, new overlapping systems of control need to be established. The three defilements of perturbation, Buddhadhamma, then cause further turmoil and distress. In the end, human society is led to ruin and calamity, as is described in an old Thai poem, "When the bhat is spent, the tiger dies." See note poem Loka Niti. For this reason, it is important that a system of preconditions does not destroy or crush wholesome enthusiasm. One needs to be alert and use one's intelligence to ensure that the system of preconditions supports wholesome enthusiasm, which mobilizes desirable natural processes. So this is the note Loka Niti, written in 1831. The story goes that a zoo acquires a tiger for which one baht is allocated each day to keep it well fed. The keeper responsible for feeding the tiger embezzles 25 satang each day. When the director notices that the tiger is not filled out, he sends an inspector to find out what is going on. When the inspector discovers the truth, he demands 25 satang as hush money from the keeper. The tiger gets thinner, prompting the director to send a more senior inspector. He too demands 25 satang as hush money, and the tiger is soon just skin and bones. The director sends the chief inspector, but he demands the remaining 25 satang for himself, causing the tiger to perish. Then back to the main text. In today's age, which is dominated by systems based on greed, it is still possible for wholesome and virtuous development to occur, because enough people possess an adequate degree of wholesome enthusiasm. Even if this is not always obvious, we need to prevent a system of craving from becoming the dominant dynamic, which eclipses wholesome enthusiasm until it gradually recedes and eventually disappears. Instead, we ought to make wholesome enthusiasm the mainstay. Although craving may still cause some trouble, people will retain an adequate degree of stability and safety. It is necessary to acknowledge that human systems of preconditions are the driving force in the world. What are our options when we realize that people exist at different levels of spiritual development and that most people are still committed to a system based on craving? It is not sustainable for people to simply follow their desires. It is essential that those people responsible for establishing the system of preconditions are endowed with wholesome desire, and that they ensure that wholesome desire is given a prominent role within such a system. Moreover, they should set down decisive measures of heedfulness for all people to use while engaged in developing themselves. This key subject of desire tends to get overlooked. It is vital that one is able to distinguish between wholesome and unwholesome desire. When one has understood this matter, it will be easy to determine how to solve problems, and one will develop happiness with confidence. C. Deriving the greatest benefit from systems of preconditions. A frequently asked question in the modern age is how wholesome desire functions in the domain of work. The term chanda can be simply translated as pleasure, liking, or delight. Take, for example, a job interview during which one is asked, "Do you like this kind of work?" The term like here is ambiguous. One person may answer, "I like it," but imply that he likes the good salary or the fact that the work requires little exertion and provides a lot of free time. This is one kind of liking. Another person may reply, "I like it," on the grounds that the work conforms to her skills and that it is beneficial and constructive to society. The term like and desire encompass both craving, tanha, and wholesome enthusiasm, chanda. For this reason, it is important to clarify how one uses these terms. It requires discernment to understand the real meaning of the question. Do you like this kind of work? Which is, does this work fit your skills, and do you see the value of this work? It is not a matter of only liking the work because of a high income or an opportunity to be lazy and have lots of time off, which stems from selfishness and craving. If we have wholesome enthusiasm, we truly love our work because we recognize its value. We see how it benefits society and helps develop our nation. If the social benefit of work is not clearly evident, or if one does not recognize the wider value of one's work, and yet the work is required, one can generate wholesome enthusiasm with the attitude that the work is valuable for self-development and leads to the improvement in our own lives. One aspect of work is that it is a domain for personal growth. Every kind of work or activity, whether it involves a task that we enjoy or not, is an opportunity for personal development. The more difficult the task, the greater is the opportunity to train, to sharpen skills, and to increase intelligence. If one can summon wholesome desire and generate a wish to train, one will enjoy even those things previously found unpleasant, and one will delight even in difficult work. The more challenging the task, the more one gains. By the time the task is complete, one has passed through an extensive period of self-development. Our daily work and activities take up the most amount of time in our lives, approximately 8 hours or 1/3 of each day. The remaining 16 hours or so are taken up by sleeping or traveling, or of simply being fatigued. For this reason, one needs to make the most out of these 8 hours of productive activity. If one needs to force oneself to do this work, then one is in trouble. These 8 hours will be wasted, and one's life will be filled with unhappiness. It is thus vital to generate wholesome desire, to recognize the importance of having love for one's work. One can tell oneself that by having such love, one will develop oneself. develop one's capabilities, develop one's ability to solve problems, develop wisdom, and develop the mind. One will grow in endurance, energy, self-restraint, mindfulness, and concentration. This wholesome enthusiasm will bestow meaning to one's work and will increase one's happiness. When engaging in displeasurable work, the mind is stifled without a sense of relief. This mental constriction and confinement is suffering indeed. The mind then gets caught in a cycle of such suffering. When the mind finds a way out of this impasse, one feels relieved and happy. Therefore, whenever one is experiencing difficulty, one should generate such wholesome desire. Then every activity will be endowed with such zeal as mentioned above, one will recognize that at the very least, one has a valuable opportunity to develop oneself. Most often, when working, one must encounter other people. If one is not plagued by stifling thoughts or emotions, these encounters are also an opportunity for self-training. One can train, for example, in speech. What sort of speech is effective, non-offensive, and conducive to friendship and cooperation? All such activities are opportunities for training. Work may be defined as those tasks necessary to accomplish. Wholesome enthusiasm is the desire to perform these tasks, along with the desire to understand the details of this work. The desire to act is thus inherently an aspect of training and of study. True training involves the desire to know and the desire to act. By generating this desire to know and act, the essence of training has been reached. The desire to train, to learn, and to act is the same as the desire to understand. When willingly engaged in a task, one trains oneself and is engaged in study. Both formal learning and formal work are aspects of training, because in both cases one is improving one's life. If one practices correctly, one's entire life will be a form of training, of self-development. Technically speaking, one can use the term chanda in reference to all activities. It does not simply refer to one's work. There are two aspects to this term. Chanda, as it is, number one, chanda as a desire for a natural state of completion. Here one wishes for all things with which one is engaged to be well and in good order, and to reach a state of natural completeness and fulfillment. Number two, chanda as desire to accord with causes and conditions. One wishes for success directly in accord with causes and conditions. For example, every profession has a natural objective. The objective of the medical profession, for instance, is to cure people from illness. The objective of the teaching profession is to instill goodness and knowledge in children or in pupils. We should ask ourselves what the direct purpose of our specific individual profession is. Government work and the work by state institutions, for example, requires a clear objective. Before beginning a job, we should clearly investigate its objectives, and we then ask ourselves whether we agree with and approve of them. When we decide to then undertake the task, we can attend accurately to these objectives. And through our enthusiasm and determination, we seek to bring about results consistent with these objectives. This is chanda. As for a salary or financial remuneration, this is a matter of belonging to the system of preconditions. With wholesome desire and wisdom, one sees that money is a support for devoting oneself fully to one's work in order to fulfill its objective, without needing to worry about how one will earn one's livelihood or to seek some other form of occupation. Although one abides by a system of conventions, one understands and benefits from it. When people possess wholesome enthusiasm and understand the true purpose of their work and the nature of the agreed-upon terms, the system will not be seen simply as a way to force people to work. One will discern that it aims to promote wholesome desire so that people can commit themselves fully to their work and be freed from financial worries. If people have wholesome desire, are determined to perform their work in order to fulfill its true purpose, have a love for this form of success, and receive an adequate financial recompense, they and their families will abide in well-being. This correct, virtuous way of practice provides people with two kinds of happiness. First, they derive happiness directly from their work, knowing that they have attended to it correctly. Second, they feel assured by the wages or salary, knowing that it will be a support to further dedicate themselves to their activities. They are pleased that their work progresses well, and they are confident that their enthusiastic efforts lead to results consonant with the work's true objective to the well-being of an institution or the nation in a smooth and lasting way. This is how a system based on wholesome desire operates. D. Fun and learning, happiness and training. Now let us turn our attention to education. In the process of learning, it is imperative to generate wholesome enthusiasm, for if this does not occur, people will not experience real happiness while learning. The best one can hope for in such a case is to have fun, which is the happiness of someone dedicated to pleasure, similar to the pleasure derived from watching a play or a movie. If wholesome enthusiasm has been generated, whether one's learning process is fun or not becomes a minor, insignificant matter. Granted, having fun fosters motivation and interest in students, and it is an instrument for facilitating an understanding of the gist of the subject at hand. Having fun, however, is not the essence of education. It is not an essential part of the true learning process. In connection to the explanation above, having fun is simply a supportive factor which one must know how to apply in order to aid wholesome desire and to enter the true learning process. Education begins with wholesome enthusiasm, and it is vital that children possess such a desire. Although amusement for children is useful when it successfully helps to generate wholesome desire, without wholesome desire, one must rely entirely on having fun, and one must constantly increase this sense of fun. Needing to constantly entertain the children is wearisome for the teachers, who need to come up with new ways of providing the students with fun activities. It is true that an ability to make learning fun is an admirable skill, but it is important to also instill wholesome enthusiasm. It is necessary to distinguish these two qualities and to ensure that fun is not simply a way of gratifying the desire for pleasure, which is often the case, say, by watching a movie. Otherwise, the teacher resembles an actor, and the pleasure derived by having fun is a form of feeding craving. This feeding of craving by amusing oneself with sights, sounds, etc. gives rise to problems, which then need to be rectified. The basic problem is an attachment to such enjoyment, along with a sense of apathy and boredom, which requires people to seek increasingly greater amounts and degrees of stimulation. Using such entertainment and teaching will at first provide much fun for the students, but eventually they will grow accustomed to and bored with it. The next time, one must add to the amusement or introduce new forms of entertainment, thus increasing the stimulation and gratification. This becomes an endless cycle. The teacher becomes fatigued, and the students themselves are at a dead end, spinning around in a vortex of craving. The students become addicted to such entertainment, only seeking amusement. Rather than being fascinated with learning, they wait for the next performance or show. They do not have the desire to learn and to seek knowledge by themselves. In this way, the flow of craving is strengthened. If one is not careful, children will not be interested in learning. Instead, they will only delight in the aspects of entertainment. They will not advance to acquiring vital information, and they will not generate wholesome enthusiasm. For this reason, it is essential that one understands the proper role of entertainment and fun in education. Having fun helps to create an initial interest in learning. It is a preliminary and external factor in the true process of learning. It acts as a link to something greater, not as an end goal. The true purpose of external factors in education is to generate internal factors within an individual. Teachers are an outside influence, a voice of encouragement and guidance. Ideally, they are a positive influence and act as virtuous friends, kalyanamitta. They transmit knowledge and promote certain kinds of seeing, listening, and thinking in order for the pupils to generate their own interest and enthusiasm, which then becomes the driving force in their studies. Besides transmitting specific information, the true success of a teacher thus rests with his or her ability to help generate wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, within the students. If teachers do not have this aim, then all they can do is entertain the students, which eventually leads to apathy and boredom on the part of the students and fatigue on the part of the teachers. Teachers, virtuous friends, or other external influences need thus to act as a medium, linking external factors with internal factors and helping students to generate virtuous qualities within themselves. Otherwise, teachers reinforce in the students the characteristic of being dependent on others. If teachers understand the true responsibility of the teaching profession, they will seek ways to facilitate an understanding in the students of the subject materials and to induce an interest in learning. If students develop this wholesome enthusiasm, they can progress in their studies independently. Although the teacher is not present, they will say, I have a subject of study to pursue. I want to research this matter. I wish to go to the library and read up on the subject. They will derive happiness from this research because it satisfies their interest in learning. It fulfills the desire to gain knowledge. In this way, learning will progress naturally and automatically. If we are able to generate the wholesome desire as the starting point in our studies, our entire way of life in pursuit of happiness will change, and the new kind of happiness that gradually increases throughout this process is exceptional and unexpected. Before, we only relied on craving, seeking to obtain and consume things. We excitedly pursued desirable sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tangibles for consumption. When we experienced these things, we felt gratification, yet when we encountered undesirable objects, we were displeased, irritated, and distressed. Our happiness and unhappiness was entirely dependent on likes and dislikes, subject to craving, and our view on happiness were limited to this dynamic. When one gives rise to wholesome enthusiasm, one experiences a new form of desire. One wishes to truly learn about things and to act in order to bring about improvement. When one attains knowledge or does things well, one is happy, and this happiness increases exponentially. One's relationship changes even to those things that are unpleasant and were formerly distressing. When one sees that there are aspects to undesirable things that are worthy of study and investigation, one wants to understand them. One asks us such questions as, how is this object bad? Why is this object undesirable? One begins to appreciate unpleasant things as because they provide an opportunity for learning. Wholesome enthusiasm leads people to appreciate and even to derive joy from undesirable things and situations. This happiness stems from gaining knowledge and from one's own skillful actions. Note that wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, is associated with and must be accompanied by wisdom, panya. This is unlike craving, tanha, which is accompanied by ignorance, avijja, and requires no wisdom. Craving can arise at all times, while wholesome desire is only developed with the help of wisdom. How is wholesome desire accompanied by wisdom? Say one encounters a disagreeable, unpleasant object which is rejected by craving. Yet when wisdom recognizes that the object is beneficial in some way, wholesome enthusiasm participates in the process. The desire to know and the desire to act are set in motion, and happiness follows along with the fulfillment of this desire. With the introduction of wholesome enthusiasm, likes and dislikes based on craving lose almost all of their influence and power. Those things previously considered unacceptable by craving, those things which used to be deplorable and cause affliction, now with the power of wisdom and wholesome desire are able to provide happiness. In this way, one who begins a true form of education and training is able to find happiness even from those things that do not offer gratification to craving. This process of learning then develops whereby preferences and aversions gradually lose their ability to overwhelm and sway the mind. One's attentions, thoughts, and happiness centers around knowledge and skillful action. This is how someone like Albert Einstein comes to be. On a practical level, if one is able to establish an education system promoting a basic level of wholesome enthusiasm, the nation will have an increased number of creators who will offset those consumers who have no desire to act, other than to find ways to satisfy their craving. In some, this process involves a delight in the goodness and completion of something. If the object has not yet reached such a state of goodness and completion, one wants to act in order to help bring about this state, and one wants to know what needs to be done to accomplish this. Alternatively, the desire to know precedes the desire to act. When one has gained the necessary knowledge, one is able to act according to one's wishes. When one completes the action and satisfies one's desire, happiness follows, and this happiness increases the more one accomplishes. The desire to know and the desire to act function in unison. These aspects of desire lead to and are accompanied by happiness and true learning. If these two aspects of desire are absent, learning will be difficult and students will be unwilling and happy. If one is able to generate wholesome enthusiasm, learning will proceed automatically in the same way as the Buddha stated that with dawn as harbinger, the rising of the sun is guaranteed. In connection to society, the relationship with other people, wholesome desire, chanda, can be expanded into 4 spiritual qualities referred to as the 4 divine abidings, Brahma Vihara, literally qualities characteristic of Brahma gods, or supreme spiritual qualities, loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha. Here one can see how the development of desire runs parallel to the development of happiness. In fact, these 2 forms of development are identical. As one elevates desire from craving to wholesome enthusiasm, and as one develops this enthusiasm, happiness is expanded and deepened. Joy in learning and joy from learning. Although deriving happiness in one's studies is important as part of the process of learning, it is not enough. Happiness is not simply a stage in learning or in spiritual practice, but rather it is the most essential part and the goal of one's studies. If one understands the true nature of happiness, one will discern that study or training is in itself a development of happiness in order for the student or practitioner to be truly happy. The genuine development of happiness requires fulfillment of spiritual qualities which are present in those people who are accomplished. I've written several books on this subject of happiness as the goal of education or of spiritual training. Let us review some of the material in these books. The true purpose of education is to provide people with happiness. It is not enough for people to enjoy their studies. Education also needs to lead people to happiness. People then dwell in a normal state of happiness. Moreover, the learning process itself is also endowed with happiness. Does modern education provide people with happiness, or does it make people simply hunger and yearn for happiness? An incorrect form of education leads people to discontentment. It becomes an instrument for sucking happiness out of people and making them thirst for it. The further one studies in such a defective system of education, the greater is one's thirst for true happiness. One is in want of happiness while studying, and one graduates from this system with yearning. One then rushes ahead in order to find personal happiness, competing for it and creating suffering and hardship for others. When people who are deprived of happiness experience suffering, they vent their frustrations out on others and seize whatever happiness they can find for themselves. If children are taught in such a harmful way, upon completion of their studies, they will seek to maximize their own personal happiness. In this modern, technically developed age, one sees how people are caught up in the pursuit of happiness to the extent they no longer have the time for others. They are in a constant state of want and pursuit of happiness, and they keep expecting it to arrive in the future. The thirst for happiness is rampant throughout the entire society, including family, households, schools, and workplaces. The mind state of happiness deprivation is widespread, apparent throughout society. For this reason, we must emphasize that true education makes people happy and teaches people to look for happiness in the correct ways. Those people who have passed a correct system of education are able to solve problems, dispel suffering, and establish themselves in happiness. They cultivate themselves in order to reach more refined forms of happiness, and they share their happiness with others in a wide-ranging way. People who suffer from some form of problem often vent their frustrations on others. And although this is an attempt on their part to find some kind of ease, their actions causes harm to others and to society. This includes those children who have some kind of difficulty and consequently act out in negative ways. On the contrary, those people who abide in happiness tend to share their joy with others, even when there is no direct intention to do so. Thus, to increase happiness in the world, we need to increase happiness in individuals. This corresponds with the Buddha's aim in relation to society. Abhyapajaham sukham lokam, to create and abide in a world that is happy, free from oppression. This is our task as human beings, to create a happier world, to reduce oppression, to offer mutual support and assistance, and to abide in collective, lasting happiness. F. Despite the glut of consumable objects, happiness is on the wane. One of the consequences of the inability to know what is enough and the constant pursuit of happiness is that people develop the characteristic of being prone to suffering and find it increasingly difficult to be happy. Compare this with children. Most children from the early days before they could walk laugh openly, smile with delight, and are easily amused. Little things that they obtain or see give them happiness. But as people grow up, they find it more and more difficult to find happiness. As mentioned above, those things that at one time provided happiness are now considered boring, leading to indifference and a lack of enthusiasm. In order to be happy, things must accord with a long list of desires and preconditions, and yet these people still don't experience real gratification. They chase after things without ever reaching their destination. It becomes more and more difficult to satisfy them. When it becomes increasingly difficult for people to be happy, they also become more easily agitated. Before, going without certain things, living with certain inconveniences, and being required to perform certain tasks was not a problem. These situations didn't cause suffering. Later on, they may become well off, own an abundance of things, and be extremely comfortable. They can order others to do their work. The only muscle in the body that gets exercise is the index finger. But they may become attached to this ease and convenience if they lack anything, if something doesn't arrive exactly on time, if they don't get what they want, or they must do something requiring effort. All of these situations become a source of suffering. They thus become more prone to suffering, and they acclimate to suffering. This runs counter to true spiritual development. If one is engaged in proper spiritual development, as one gets older, one should be more proficient at being happy. One should be able to increasingly generate internal happiness, and one should find it easier to be happy and less prone to suffering. Those who are developing spiritually must be simultaneously developing in happiness. Their happiness must be increasing. Within the ordinary sphere of human living situations or responsibilities, they should feel confident about experiencing happiness. They can make the claim to others, "Don't waste your time trying to make me unhappy. You won't succeed." These days, however, the reverse seems to be occurring. People seem to find it increasingly difficult to discover happiness, and they are unnaturally more prone to suffering. Many children in the IT age seem to have this trait. One cause for this is that the true upsurge in technological advances permits a quick gratification of desire in regards to consuming material things, and it increases material comfort. The drawback is that people become more easily jaded, or else they feel they cannot live without these comforts. In order to feel satisfied, they must acquire things as quickly as they desire them. The real reason, however, is an inadequate and incorrect spiritual practice. The result is that instead of technological growth helping to promote true happiness, it ends up crippling people's ability to experience happiness. People then become incapable of experiencing true happiness. This is what happens when people deal with technology incorrectly. They fail to derive the true benefit from it. Instead of receiving its positive effects, they receive its negative ones. The greater the abundance of material things and the greater the ease and convenience in society, the more important it becomes for people to train their minds and develop the ability to find happiness. If people simply get caught up in pursuing pleasure from external objects, they will find it increasingly difficult to be happy. At the same time, they will neglect the training and an increased capability to experience happiness. Besides squandering an opportunity to develop themselves, they may eventually be incapable of any form of happiness. For this reason, give heed to developing one's capability to experience happiness. Otherwise, there will be no end to problems. People's own search for happiness will be futile, and their internal suffering will intensify. Mutual oppression in society will increase, and the world will become a more troubled place. There will be no hope for peace if one develops happiness correctly. However, in all internal dilemmas will be resolved. Various spiritual factors will be activated and set into place because in a correct spiritual practice, the vital spiritual factors are naturally linked and integrated. Sense desire, the desire for material objects, is thus fraught with danger, and it is the cause for various kinds of wrongdoing. People desire sense pleasure within a system of preconditions. See the earlier material on this subject, which is linked to the material here. The result is that the extent and range of immoral conduct is amplified. This is how craving operates within a system of preconditions in which people seek desirable objects by avoiding or by half-heartedly conforming to the direct processes of nature. Our responsibility is thus to help people to develop wholesome desire and to integrate human laws with natural laws. This gives an outline of the advantages and disadvantages of happiness. The essential point is that one applies liberating wisdom, nisarana panya, in regard to all forms of happiness, beginning with sense pleasure, until one reaches the freedom from mental defilement. While experiencing happiness, be vigilant and know moderation. This way, one will remain strong and avoid mental weakness. 11.10 Practical Application. A. Summon wisdom to deal with suffering. In the development of happiness, it is important not to neglect the term dukkha, suffering. An acknowledgement is made that suffering exists and that it is both placed in opposition to and paired alongside happiness. People need to gain a comprehensive and clear perspective of these matters rather than practice avoidance and leave unresolved issues to fester in the mind. Moreover, if one is happy, yet suffering still exists, then that happiness is not true and reliable. Therefore, the development of happiness implies the simultaneous reduction, removal, disappearance, and cessation of suffering. The expression development of happiness can thus be replaced with the expression cessation of suffering. These refer to one and the same process. And for this process to be complete, regardless of how much happiness a person may experience, one must still reach the stage of utter cessation of suffering. Technically speaking, to counter the sense that the development of happiness is open-ended and without a clear end goal is referred to as the cessation of suffering. The term cessation, which is a translation for the Pali term nirodha, carries with it specific linguistic problems, in that its meaning is not altogether clear and it may give rise to misunderstanding. When people hear the phrase cessation of suffering, they may understand that this refers to a gradual yet constant elimination or removal of suffering existing in the heart. In fact, the true meaning of nirodha refers to the non-arising of suffering, or to the complete and utter freedom from suffering. On the highest level, nirodha refers to nibbana, a state completely free from suffering. Occasionally the term anupada nirodha is used, translated as cessation by means of non-arising, that is, absolute or complete cessation. For the sake of convenience, we may thus translate dukkha nirodha as the non-arising of suffering or freedom from suffering. Partly for ease of mind of the listeners, when the subject is discussed, the term suffering is often avoided, and instead the process is described as the development of happiness. Note, however, that by doing so, one is not neglecting the subject of suffering, and eventually one will need to address it accordingly. The expression development of happiness necessarily implies the proper management of suffering. An essential aspect of suffering is one's attitude and relationship to it. If one fails to understand the importance of this point, then one will be unable to truly develop in happiness. Here we are referring to the duty or responsibility, kicca, vis-a-vis suffering. If one gets this wrong, then one's entire spiritual practice will be misdirected and end in failure. People often neglect this essential factor. As suffering is the first noble truth, let us review the duties or responsibilities pertaining to all four of the noble truths. Number 1, suffering, dukkha, a state of pressure and affliction, acting as a basis for human problems. Alternatively, anything that has the capacity to create problems. The associated responsibility here is parina, thorough or comprehensive understanding. Number 2, cause of suffering, samudaya. The associated responsibility is pahana, abandoning, eliminating, or ending. Number 3, cessation of suffering, nirodha. The associated responsibility is sachikiraya, realizing, seeing clearly, actualizing, or attaining. 4, path magga, the way leading to the end of suffering. The associated responsibility is bhavana, cultivating, developing, practicing, or undertaking. Without going into a lengthy analysis of these 4 responsibilities here, note, however, that they are of fundamental importance. They exist inextricably paired with the 4 noble truths. For if one practices any one of the 4 noble truths incorrectly in respect to its associated duty or responsibility, one's progress in the Dhamma will come to naught, and one's efforts will be in vain. It will be impossible to awaken or realize the Dhamma. In respect to the first noble truth, the Pali states, with suffering there should be thorough understanding, dukkham parineyam. Suffering must be understood by way of wisdom. Suffering is there to be understood. A simple example of this is that before one is able to solve a problem, one must first understand the nature of the problem. The definition of dukkha is not limited to the general concept of physical and mental pain and discomfort. The term also refers to everything that has the potential to create a sense of oppression when one fails to respond to it correctly. For this reason, the subject of suffering requires comprehensive understanding. In sum, suffering is a matter to be taken up and dealt with by wisdom. It is not something to be stored up and accumulated in the heart until it oozes out or goes rancid and one loses one's radiance and joy. If one encounters suffering, welcome it with wisdom. Don't allow the mind to get caught up with it, or as people informally say, don't obsess over your emotions. Don't burden or oppress the mind with suffering. And if the mind has already allowed it entry, don't let it smolder. Hasten to send it on to wisdom. If one simply stores up suffering within the heart, one suffers in vain, one does not dispel it, and one's life becomes stuck. Yet if one allows wisdom to deal with it, besides finding solutions to end it, one's whole life moves forward. It is not the mind's responsibility to deal with suffering. This responsibility rests with wisdom. The mind's task is not to bear suffering, but rather to apply wisdom. The principal agent in this matter is wisdom, which solves problems and dispels suffering. Wisdom brings suffering to an end and at the same time generates happiness. The mind's responsibility is to witness happiness. One should develop the mind's proficiency for experiencing happiness and develop wisdom's ability to solve problems and dispel suffering. A healthy mind is endowed with happiness, and healthy wisdom is capable of dispelling suffering. For the mind to be truly healthy and happy, wisdom must completely dispel suffering. Spiritual practice needs to be accurate by attending to the duty corresponding to each of the 4 noble truths. If one oppresses oneself by accumulating suffering, causing internal distress, frustration, and depression, one is responding to suffering incorrectly. Instead, one needs to change course and summon wisdom to help. Happiness is classified as part of the 3rd noble truth, cessation, nirodha. It is recognized that there are relative degrees of happiness which need to be developed until one reaches supreme happiness. The responsibility here is subchapter, to realize, actualize, or perfect happiness. This development of happiness should be attended to as a regular and constant part of one's life. The ability to be happy is the starting point of spiritual practice. For this reason, one needs to establish oneself correctly from the outset so that one goes in the right direction and proceeds with confidence. B. Practice being free from suffering. The spiritual journey begins with an understanding of happiness. As one progresses along the journey, there is another key principle that directly benefits one's practice. This principle has to do with how one relates to happiness. and how it also pertains inherently to one's relationship to suffering. In the Buddhadhamma Sutta, the Buddha outlines this method of practice in regards to happiness. It contains 4 factors. Number 1, to refrain from creating extra suffering for oneself. 2, to not forsake righteous happiness. 3, to not indulge in any sort of happiness, even righteous happiness. Number 4, to strive in order to bring an end to the cause of suffering, i.e., to strive in order to realize higher forms of happiness, all the way to supreme happiness. Number 1, it is common for people to create unnecessary suffering for themselves. They may be abiding in a state of well-being, free from distress, yet still inflict suffering on themselves. Examples of this are those people who drink excessive amounts of alcohol or indulge in addictive drugs. Many of them start out healthy, yet consume these things even though they clearly know that they are harmful, both physically and mentally. Although they possess this knowledge, they create suffering and problems. On a more subtle level, people often gather and accumulate various sense impressions like sights or sounds that are slightly bothersome or annoying. Trivial things done or said by others, things that are part of the past, are stored up in people's minds. Later, when they are alone, they dig these things up and proliferate over them, causing misery and unhappiness. This is another example of piling suffering onto oneself. In respect to householders, it is not considered blameworthy to have some degree of mental proliferation, to elaborate on one's experiences, but the encouragement is to think in positive rather than negative ways. Negative mental proliferations are called unwholesome formations, Buddhaghosacariya, which are marked by greed, hatred, and delusion, and which generate suffering. Mindfulness, sati, should be applied here as a restraint in order to cease thinking in negative ways. Instead, one thinks in wholesome ways and creates positive mental formations. Buddhaghosacariya, beginning with joy, pamoja. Joy is then followed by bliss, piti, and tranquility, passaddhi. This is the way to solve problems and to generate happiness. The Buddha described the ascetic practices of the Nigantha Jains, who clearly inflicted suffering on themselves. Instead of using a blade to shave their heads, they used tweezers to pull out each hair, one at a time. They devised all sorts of strategies to increase suffering. They would drive in nails or thorns to their sleeping platforms and lie on these. They would abstain from food and water for long periods. In the cold season, they would immerse in chilly rivers. In the hot season, they would stand out in the blazing sun. The Buddha described these practices of self-mortification as examples of self-inflicted suffering. These are examples from history. The reader can think of comparable ways in which modern people unnecessarily pile suffering onto themselves. Righteous happiness can be found in everyday situations. Take, for example, those lay people who earn their living honestly. They use their money for enjoyment and to support their family's independence. According to the teachings on the 4 kinds of happiness for householders, Ki, Hai, Sukha, the happiness of having wealth, the happiness of spending wealth, the happiness of being free from debt, and the happiness of performing virtuous and blameless deeds. Of performing good deeds by way of body, speech, and mind, happiness that cause no harm to anyone. This kind of righteous happiness should not be neglected or forsaken. There are numerous kinds of righteous happiness. There is the happiness stemming from generosity, dana, moral conduct, sila, and cultivation of the mind, bhavana. There is the elevated happiness of developing tranquility meditation, samatha bhavana, and insight meditation, vipassana bhavana. Alternatively, there is the happiness of loving kindness and compassion, or the happiness of the 4 principles of service, sankha vatu, see below. In sum, these kinds of happiness should not be renounced or objected to. Those people who adhere to a doctrine of extreme asceticism aim to inflict more suffering on themselves, and they thus shun happiness. Number 3, non-indulgence in any form of happiness is a vital factor and indicates an advanced level of spiritual development. Experiencing righteous forms of happiness is already an excellent step in spiritual practice. But problems can arise due to such happiness. Namely, people may get attached to or blindly absorbed in it. This attachment or indulgence leads to laziness, heedlessness, and decline. One who is able to escape from this pitfall has reached an important stage in practice. When one has reached this stage, happiness is unable to dominate the mind. First, one does not fall into heedlessness. Happiness does not become a harmful influence. Second, one does not lose one's independence. One is not enslaved by happiness. Third, one has the opportunity to develop higher forms of happiness. Number 4, the effort to bring an end to the cause of suffering leads to perfect happiness. As long as the source or seed of suffering remains, there is still the potential for suffering to resurface. Suffering is still latent. At this stage, happiness is still imperfect. Here, the cause of suffering must be completely eliminated. This final factor explains why the term cessation of suffering is so widely used. It points clearly and definitively to the necessary task. As stated earlier, the expression development of happiness is useful, but it is open-ended. It does not clearly indicate the final goal of practice. Although this process can be described in both a positive and a negating way, only a negating description is decisive and clear. Suffering is completely removed, with perfect happiness remaining. The expression to strive in order to bring it into ... indicates how the elimination of the cause of suffering goes hand in hand with effort. The causes for suffering do not necessarily vanish immediately. Rather, one gradually reduces greed, lobha, hatred, dosa, and delusion, moha, and weakens craving, tanha, conceit, mana, and fixed views, ditthi. In this way, one practices according to the path, by developing virtuous conduct, concentration, and wisdom. Mental defilements diminish and ignorance decreases. Relatively speaking, this is the same as gradually increasing happiness. This fourth factor can thus be paraphrased as the development of happiness, but for the sake of clarity, one adds the qualification to develop happiness to perfection. This is why the earlier definition in parentheses states, to strive in order to realize higher forms of happiness all the way to supreme happiness, parama sukha. For this fourth factor to be fulfilled, one must link it with the third factor of not indulging in any form of happiness, of not getting stuck, acting heedlessly, abandoning oneself to some form of pleasure, or ceasing to make effort. The fulfillment of the third factor enables one to reach the fourth factor and to reach spiritual perfection. Another way of describing the proper relationship to happiness is to focus on 4 main factors of spiritual practice. Number 1, heedfulness. This factor applies to everyone. It is an important reminder because happiness induces fascination, captivation, procrastination, inertia, laziness, and carelessness. One thus needs to take care not to fall into heedlessness. History shows us that almost every successful person, family, society, nation, or even civilization, having reached a level of prosperity and growth, tends to become indulgent and careless and eventually falls into ruin and destruction. This is a crucial issue for families, and parents must take great care. Even the supreme virtue of loving kindness can be excessive. In the case when parents pamper and pander to their children and do not apply equanimity, upekkha, as a balancing force, eventually their children become weak, careless, indulgent, emotionally stunted, and unable to face the challenges of life. The family will consequently be undermined and ruined. This is true also for individuals. At first, one may strive to establish oneself in the world, yet when one is wealthy and happy, one may become indulgent and heedless, eventually falling into decline. In sum, one should beware against carelessness in regards to states of happiness. 2, taking favorable opportunities. When one encounters suffering, one generally feels oppressed, stifled, and obstructed. Everything one does feels difficult, and great effort is required. The advantage to this sense of obstruction and difficulty, however, is precisely because of the need for increased effort in the face of suffering. As a result, there is learning, training, and development. When one acts appropriately in response to suffering, one grows and reaches great success. The Pali term sukha, happiness, can also be translated as fluent, smooth, convenient, or easy. When things are convenient, smooth, and easy, one should hasten to accomplish necessary deeds. When one experiences happiness, one should use this valuable opportunity for getting things done. Using this opportunity to act is better than allowing happiness to lure one into a trap of enchantment and fixation, which only leads to indulgence and heedlessness. With the assistance by firmly establishing wisdom, one goes in the opposite direction of using the opportunity provided by happiness to strive to get things done. This generates even greater spiritual growth and development. One who has developed in this way is able to derive benefit from both happiness and suffering. Indeed, the term Dhamma practitioner implies the ability to use wise reflection and to discern the advantages in every situation, to think in such ways. There is happiness, good. Conditions are easy, convenient, smooth. This provides an opportunity to accomplish things to the utmost. There is suffering, good. Things are challenging. I need to make great effort. Bring them on. I will proceed undaunted. Number 3, independence. Independence or freedom is the goal of Buddhism. True independence is founded on freedom of the heart, mental freedom. A prominent feature of this mental freedom is freedom in relation to happiness. Independence follows on from the first factor of heedfulness, of not being dominated and led astray by happiness. The first factor, however, is one of negation, of countering the urge to indulge, whereas this fourth factor passes beyond to a level of inner freedom. Those who are spiritually developed are endowed with happiness, but they remain unattached to this happiness. Those who are fully developed experience free, independent happiness, yet are in no way bound or reliant on this happiness. For those individuals still in training, establishing this independence permits them to develop further. And number 4, further development. This refers to the recognition that one still needs to make progress in one's spiritual practice. These 4 factors work together in harmony. They lead to supreme happiness and to the complete removal of the source of suffering. One both abides in happiness and develops happiness, and one experiences happiness throughout this entire process of spiritual development. C, happiness in the household. For the sake of practical application, it is useful to look at the 3 aspects of happiness that the Buddha often mentioned: sense pleasure, kama-sukha, happiness in society, and happiness in spiritual development. The Buddha spoke at length on the subject of sense pleasure because it pertains to everyone in the world. Sense pleasure stems from contact by way of the sense doors. It relies on sense engagement and is dependent on material things. It is the happiness of obtaining something for one's own personal consumption. The improper response to and mismanagement of sense pleasure is the source of myriad problems in the world, both personal and social, including interpersonal conflict, competition, and persecution. If one is to solve human problems effectively, one must address this issue. One must encourage people to develop wisdom in order to manage sense desire and sense pleasure correctly. At the very least, the advantages of engagement with sense pleasure should outweigh the harm. In any case, the subject of sense pleasure has been covered at length earlier in this chapter. Here, let it suffice simply to mention it as one aspect of happiness highlighted by the Buddha. The second kind of happiness, happiness in society, is derived from friendship, goodwill, and living together with kindness and compassion. The 2 primary sets of principles pertaining to this form of happiness are the 4 divine abidings, Brahmavihara, and the 4 bases of social solidarity, Sangha Vatu. Moreover, if one wishes for society or democracy to be truly stable, one needs to foster the 6 virtues conducive to communal life. Saranaya Dhamma, see below. The primary emphasis for this kind of happiness focuses on the divine abidings, which have been explained above. Here, for the sake of practical application, we can look at the key example of how these mental states exist in family situations, beginning with the happiness of parents when they witness the well-being and happiness of their children. Parents are often used as an example when explaining the four divine abidings of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, because it is in their nature for parents to possess these qualities. Mothers in particular epitomize these qualities and are thus used as a standard in scriptural explanations. Mothers wish for their children to be happy, healthy, and content, free from pain and illness. To see her child happy fulfills a basic wish of a mother, which in turn makes her happy. This wish for the child to be happy and healthy is called loving kindness, metta. If their child falls ill, parents will be anxious and concerned. They will strive to treat the illness, find a cure, and restore the child to good health. They will not feel happy until the child is cured. When the child completely recovers from the illness, the parents are satisfied. Their wishes have been fulfilled, and they experience happiness. This wish for the child to be free from suffering and to recover a state of well-being is called compassion. If the child grows up well, is physically attractive and graceful, excels in his or her studies, finds good work, and is promoted to a good position, i.e. the child prospers and thrives, the parents are delighted and the wish for their child to blossom and succeed is fulfilled. This wish for the child to thrive and discover ever greater happiness and the shared rejoicing when this wish is fulfilled is called appreciative joy, mudita. According to most people, the parents are now fully endowed with virtuous qualities. But according to the four divine abidings, completion has not yet been reached. The parents can comfort their children, but they have not yet truly helped them grow. The children are not yet truly mature, or one can even say that the children are not grown up. They will remain dependent on their parents for emotional support. One needs to remember the fourth factor of equanimity, upekkha. In the case that children need to learn how to take responsibility for their lives and their actions, parents must let go and refrain from acting on behalf of their children. Instead, they should stand back and watch their children lead their own lives in their own fashion. The parents do not interfere and meddle in their children's lives. This equanimity begins already when the children first learns how to stand, all the way up to the time they leave the home, get married, and look after their own families. At this time, when children leave home and start their own families, parents are discouraged from barging into their children's new homes and interfering in their affairs. They should refrain from trying to organize and rearrange their children's lives. Otherwise, it becomes a source of suffering for their children, creating conflict and discomfort for them and their spouses. When one recognizes that one's children are growing up and that the time has come for them to look after themselves, one steps back and observes. If one sees that they require some help or support, one provides assistance. One doesn't abandon them. One can still offer guidance and advice, but one refrains from interfering too much. This wish for the child to abide in a correct and purposeful way, to not behave in a faulty or errant manner, and to live righteously, while the parents maintain dispassion, objectivity, and impartiality, is called equanimity, upekkha. This factor of equanimity needs to be emphasized because many people misunderstand it and thus do not know how to apply it effectively. Equanimity, upekkha, is the link between emotions and knowledge. It is the balancing point between love and insight, the meeting point between the mind, citta, and wisdom, panya. In regards to the first three divine abidings, it is recommended to combine these with wisdom so that they lead to beneficial results. But in everyday life, it is not always certain that wisdom will play a participatory role. For example, it is possible to love without being wise. Equanimity, however, stems directly from wisdom. It can only arise accompanied by wisdom. Equanimity without wisdom is a counterfeit equanimity and may be referred to as stupid indifference. With the balancing influence of equanimity, the practice by parents of the first three divine abidings helps children to develop emotionally and promotes mental health. The children will be able to feel love, goodwill, and compassion. But if things are imbalanced by the absence of equanimity, Parents simply coddle their children, which makes them weak and dependent on others. If the parents are strongly prejudiced in favor of their children, the children will become demanding and spoiled. They will expect others to please them, and they will be unable to sympathize with other people. Indeed, equanimity is the driving force in spiritual development, particularly in regards to intelligence, fortitude, skill, and a sense of responsibility. Although it is both normal and necessary for parents to apply equanimity when raising their children, they are often not aware of this quality and do not know how to benefit from it in the maximum way. Take, for example, a mother who loves her infant son dearly and nurses and feeds him. Yet in order for the child to grow up, it is appropriate for him to learn how to use a spoon, a fork, a bowl, etc., and to be able to look after himself. One day, the mother knows that it is time for the child to learn how to feed himself. She teaches him how to use a spoon and lets him learn from trial and error. She lets go and observes his progress. She repeats a similar lesson for peeling a banana or peeling an apple. This is equanimity. Parents then ask themselves, what should our children be able to do? What skills should they master? They continue to apply equanimity by presenting their children with tasks or challenges and offering advice. They then let go, observing how their children stand on their own feet. Eventually, the child becomes proficient in many areas. If parents only express kindness and compassion, their children will tend to remain passive. If they combine these qualities with equanimity, their children will become observant and industrious. When parents express only kindness and compassion, they experience the immediate and temporary satisfaction of seeing their children happy. But if they also apply equanimity, their happiness will be long-lasting because they will witness their children's ongoing progress and success. Parenting is a model example of how to develop happiness on a social level. Parents and other leaders and guides in society need to cultivate these four divine abidings, in particular the factor of equanimity. Equanimity calls for truth and correctness. It encompasses a desire for our loved ones to be established in rectitude, righteousness, and impeccability. This is a supreme form of desire, and when this desire is fulfilled, one experiences a profound and abiding happiness. When individual homes and families live happily and are established in righteous principles, they act as core units for helping to create prosperous, happy, and civilized societies. D. Developing sense desire from competition to cooperation. In regard to sense desire, which is tied up with selfishness, when people develop the four divine abidings and their minds begin to radiate these qualities outward, their selfishness is reduced. They will not be exclusively caught up in trying to obtain things in order to seek personal gratification. Now, they also begin to consider the happiness of others. This wholesome desire, along with the happiness of seeing others, possesses attractive physical features, good health, contentment, etc., acts as a counterbalance to selfish impulses. The wish for others to be happy is a form of loving kindness, metta, a form of friendship, mitta. The wish for them to be free from suffering is compassion, karuna. Sharing in happiness when others succeed is appreciative joy, mudita. And when others have the potential to make mistakes, one wishes for them to abide in righteousness and correctness. One thus adopts equanimity, upekkha, in order to safeguard and maintain the truth, the Dhamma. When people are endowed with these four qualities, their minds are radiant and expansive, deserving of the title Brahma, divine, elevated, sublime. Their happiness will increase, and importantly, this happiness will be shared by others. If one simply remains at the level of sense desire, one's happiness will surely be competitive. If I win something, you must lose, or you must do without. If you seize something, I go without. If I derive happiness, he derives none, or else he suffers, and vice versa. In sum, one vies for happiness, one does not share one's happiness. This is one crucial disadvantage of sensual or material pleasure. The reason the world is so troubled, so full of oppression, brutality, and killing is because of this scramble for sense pleasure. As a response, People need to develop themselves in order to reduce the dangers of sense pleasure and increase the blessing of higher forms of happiness. The happiness of the four divine abidings is shared. When others experience happiness, we too are happy. A mother is not happy until her children are happy. Once they are happy, she too is happy. This is a shared collective happiness. Here one has developed happiness to another level, to social happiness. One has graduated from a competitive form of happiness where everyone simply fends for himself and vies for limited objects to a shared collective happiness. This is also a crucial stage for ethics, helping to promote true peace in the world. The Buddha gave great emphasis to developing social happiness, especially in the context of the four divine abidings. The four divine abidings help in developing the quality of one's mind, but for real success, one needs to also practice the four bases of social solidarity, Sangha, Vatu, and the six virtues conducive to communal life, Saraniya Dhamma. Because the management of sense desire is linked to the development of social happiness, it needs to be included in this discussion. The Buddha encouraged people to manage sense desire in a correct, righteous fashion, free from harm. At the very least, one should minimize the dangers of sense desire and use it in positive, beneficial ways. The Buddha acknowledged that sense pleasure is a form of happiness. He went on to say that it has advantages, asada, and disadvantages, dinava, and that there exists a way out, nissarana, or a solution to sense pleasure, i.e., a way to escape from its disadvantages. Indeed, the escape from sense desire is precisely the development of higher forms of happiness, beginning with the development of social happiness. There's no problem here if one still delights in sense pleasure. Along with the restraint of keeping the 5 precepts, the cultivation of social happiness prevents people from getting overly caught up with themselves and from competing with others. Instead, there will be more mutual assistance and cooperation. At the same time, people will experience another form of happiness which is more stable and enduring than sense pleasure. Many people are aware that the habitual pursuit of personal gratification eventually leads to being more susceptible to suffering, and this susceptibility to suffering fosters an inclination to suffer. Let's return to the subject of shared happiness. To begin with, when one sees others happy and well, one shares in their happiness, a feeling referred to as loving kindness, metta. Next, one wishes for others to be free from suffering and cured from illness, and one shares in their happiness when they escape from these problems. This is referred to as compassion, karuna. Compassion has other beneficial benefits. Imagine that one falls ill and experiences great discomfort. If one is preoccupied with one's own problems, thinking, "Why must this happen to me?" the suffering will be even more intense. Some may even think, "Let others suffer from this disease instead. Why does it have to be me?" These kinds of thoughts only increase the suffering. If one is endowed with compassion, when facing illness, one will not brood over one's own problems. Rather, one will consider other human beings, thinking, "Here I am faced with this illness and experience great discomfort. Yet there are other people in this world who are poor and destitute, who have no friends or relatives, who have no money to buy medicine or nurses to care for them. What must it be like for them? Yes, it is true that I am very ill, but I have friends and relatives to care for me, and doctors who are attending to me. At least I have adequate food and shelter. Think of the suffering for those people who are ill and who lack all these things." By thinking in this way, the severity of one's own illness is reduced. The fact that one is sick will lessen in importance. It may even happen that one does not feel the discomfort any longer. When one is able to further develop compassionate thoughts, one's illness becomes a reminder. One thinks, "Were I not to have this illness, I would probably have forgotten to take into consideration those other people who suffer from illness. Now that I am reminded, how can I offer them assistance?" This is how illness reminds us to help those numerous people who are destitute and hard-pressed, who have no friends or relatives or people to care for them. They need our help to be freed from affliction. Illness is an impetus for compassion. Besides spurring us to look for ways to help others, our own suffering will be abated and sometimes even disappear. One's own illness will lose its significance. The divine abidings are vital. They do not simply remain as passive emotions in the mind, but actively bear fruit in far-reaching ways. The Buddha stressed their cultivation, and the source or root of this spiritual development is wholesome desire, chanda. In this chapter, the focus has been on wholesome desire in a social context as one way of describing the importance of this spiritual factor. Besides teaching people how to manage sense desire, which has the potential to create intense suffering, one also needs to encourage people to develop social happiness by having them cultivate wholesome desire in respect to others through kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. In this way, people will share their happiness with others, and they will be impelled to offer mutual assistance. At the very least, it will help to offset and reduce the harmful effects of sense desire. Joy leads to spiritual growth. The third kind of happiness referred to above is the happiness in spiritual development. This kind of happiness is generated from within an individual. It arises simultaneously with the overall development of one's life, and it accompanies progress in Dhamma practice. The development of the body, moral conduct, the mind, and wisdom may be referred to as spiritual cultivation or Dhamma practice. When this development progresses, one experiences this spiritual happiness. The Buddha gave a teaching on 5 factors of happiness in spiritual development, which are collectively given the unusual name of concentration of the Dhamma Samadhi. Although this group is not exclusively referred to as happiness sukha, happiness is one of the factors. Moreover, all of the other factors are attributes of happiness and are connected with happiness. Since our present discussion is on happiness, we can thus refer to this group as factors of happiness. The 5 factors contained in this group refer to specific mind states, which can be called happy mind states, sukha bhava. The Buddha repeatedly stressed that someone whose Dhamma practice bears fruit will grow in these 5 qualities. Conversely, if someone practices the Dhamma, yet these 5 qualities fail to arise, there will be no hope of true success. One example the Buddha gave is of someone who listens to the Dhamma and then investigates it. If he or she practices correctly, wisdom deepens, and these 5 mind states arise. Similar to social happiness, these 5 factors of happiness in spiritual development are based on wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, and they unfold in an ordered sequence, but they are not expressed outwardly. They exist as direct and immediate attributes of the mind. These factors are as follows. Number 1, joy, pamoja, cheerfulness, gladness. This is a fundamental attribute of the mind, which people should sustain at all times. In the Dhammapada it says, full of joy, confident in the Buddha's teaching, a bhikkhu will attain the peaceful state, the stilling of formations, the bliss supreme. And that's Dhammapada verse 381. Another verse describes a monk who has practiced well and correctly and ends full of joy. He will make an end of suffering. TH verse 376. Joy is a vital, innate quality, indicating that one is progressing in spiritual practice and has the potential to develop further. When one is full of joy, it is possible to realize nibbana, or one is close to nibbana. Number 2, piti, delight, bliss, rapture. With joy, there is delight. 3, tranquility, passaddhi, serenity, calm, physical and mental relaxation. This factor acts as the link between the body and mind. If the body is tense, the mind is tense. If the mind is stressed, the body is stressed. With delight, there is tranquility and relaxation. Happiness, sukha, sense of mental refreshment, ease, absence of affliction and stress. With the arising of tranquility, there is happiness. 5, concentration, samadhi, one-pointedness of mind, steadiness of mind, absence of mental disturbance. Attention rests on a chosen object as desired. With the arising of happiness, there is the potential for concentration. Concentration acts as the link to wisdom. It prepares the mind for the effective application of wisdom. And when wisdom is developed, every other aspect of spiritual development is optimized and progresses smoothly. The presence of these 5 factors is crucial to the spiritual development of human beings. When people are endowed with these factors, their education and work proceeds effectively, and their entire Dhamma practice is steady and reliable. If people practice incorrectly, the opposite qualities like trouble and stress arise. There is then an absence of joy, delight, tranquility, and happiness, and the mind remains scattered. One then experiences inner disturbance and obstruction. The mind is imbalanced and ill at ease. The result is a lack of progress or success. If one possesses these 5 complementary factors, they will automatically be integrated with spiritual qualities connected to society, in particular the 4 divine abidings. When one generates loving kindness towards others, one engages in self-development. The performing of benevolent deeds is simultaneously a way to practice the Dhamma within oneself. By acting kindly, one develops spiritually. At the same time, by radiating a sense of loving kindness, joy arises within. Joy is then followed by other qualities, for example, of delight. Similarly, when one compassionately aids someone who is suffering, once that person is healthy and at ease, one experiences delight, which is then followed by other qualities, including happiness. If one is continually cheerful, relaxed, and calm, wherever one goes, one enhances one's social environment. Whomever one meets and speaks to feels at ease and shares in one's happiness. One thus induces happiness and engenders spiritual qualities in others. One supports others' spiritual development. When one walks on the correct path, these positive factors arise in a natural sequence. They are all interconnected. They are all aspects of happiness. A simple method of Dhamma practice is thus to maintain one's mind in a state of cheerfulness. Ideally, one combines this with loving kindness. Although it may not be one's intention, one's complexion will appear pleasing and attractive to others. One will have many cooperative and helpful friends. One will live with others in peace. One's community will prosper, and one's work will reach success. Here let us compare these 3 kinds of happiness: sense pleasure, social happiness, and happiness of spiritual development. Sense pleasure is derived from external material things obtained for one's own benefit. Each separate individual desires or covets these things, and thus sense desire breeds competition and conflict. It therefore requires caution and constraint. The purpose of the 5 precepts is to regulate sense desire, to manage the pursuit and consumption of material things, and to prevent people from creating an excess amount of trouble and oppression for each other. However much people consume contest for material things, one can wish that it does not reach the extent that the world becomes engulfed in flames. The 5 precepts exist as a reminder that sense desire requires supervision and restraint. Social happiness is generated by providing happiness to others and to society. It stems from a heart of loving kindness and compassion, the desire to see others at ease, and is thus a shared mutual happiness. The 5 happiness factors of spiritual development, beginning with joy, arise from within a person and have no negative effect on others. They may arise by doing good to others, and they are the starting point of spreading goodness outwards. So although it is an internal, personal happiness, it brings about a connection with others. It fosters virtue and mutual assistance. The latter 2 kinds of happiness cause no harm. Rather, they are supportive to both the individual and society. They help people to mitigate the harm from pursuing sense pleasure, and they introduce people to a way of enjoying sense pleasure, promoting mutual well-being. Moreover, they bring a refinement to people's lives. They provide people with a way of leading to higher levels of spiritual development. These 2 kinds of happiness should thus be given great emphasis. F. A cultivated mind is easily content. As mentioned earlier, sense pleasure is the most important matter for ordinary human beings, but because it involves vying with other people, one must manage it well and practice restraint. The 5 precepts were established in order to ensure that the pursuit of sense pleasure is consumption of desirable objects remains within proper boundaries. However much one seeks pleasure and competes with others, don't let it be a cause for severe trouble to the extent that the world enters an era of oppression. When human beings are established in the 5 precepts, society is relatively stable, but this is no guarantee that people will be happy. To improve the life of individuals in society, people must develop themselves further. This is the purpose of the 8 precepts. After one has sought pleasure by relying on external material things for 7 or 8 days, one sets aside 1 day in order to live more simply and to reduce one's dependency on these things. The time one normally uses to gratify one's own desires, one uses for other objectives by keeping the 8 precepts on the observance day, upasaka, which falls on either the 8th or 15th day of the waxing moon, or the 8th, 14th, or 15th day of the waning moon, i.e. about 4 times a month. The 5 precepts focus on the non-harming of other people. In 8 precepts, the 3rd precept is changed to abstaining from sexual activity, and the 3 additional precepts are added. Both the variation on the 3rd precept and the additional 3 precepts are matters concerning the individual. They do not directly pertain to other people. The 3 additional precepts are: 6th precept, to refrain from eating at the improper time, that is, after midday. On this day, one need not pander to the tongue. 7th precept, to refrain from singing, dancing, music, and various forms of entertainment that please the eye and ear. 8th precept, to abstain from indulging in the pleasures of tactile sensations derived from lying on soft and luxurious mattresses. 1 day each week is reserved for self-training. It is an easy method of developing happiness, independent of external things. Although the Buddha acknowledged that seeking pleasure from material things is a personal matter, he said that if people are not careful, their happiness will become dependent on these things. Eventually, no amount of these things will suffice to provide them with happiness. They will keep trying to acquire more until they end up oppressing others. To maintain one's independence, one needs to train oneself. One may have pampered oneself with good food and delicious flavors for 7 days. On the 8th day, one practices by applying the 6th precept in order to see whether one can still be happy without following the desires of the palate. Instead of delicious tastes, one now emphasizes physical health and quality of life. Rather than following the desires of the palate, one eats just enough to sustain the body. The same goes for the eyes and ears. For 7 days, one entertains oneself by way of sights and sounds. On the 8th day, one applies the 7th precept and learns to live without these amusements. One uses one's time instead for other purposes, for instance, by practicing meditation, assisting other people, or benefiting society. One may normally sleep on a thick and comfortable mattress. On the 8th day, one experiments by sleeping on a thin mat to see if one can be happy without relying on these comforts. By keeping these precepts, people are more vigilant and avoid an over-dependence on and indulgence in material things. Such a training in virtuous conduct makes people easily happy, not prone to suffering, and mentally strong. It is conducive to the further development of happiness. It is the link to mental development and wisdom development. One may wish to verify or determine to what extent one's happiness is independent of material things. To do this, consider the following kinds of people. Many people abandon themselves to the pursuit of sense pleasure. They must eat delicious foods, entertain themselves with varied amusements, etc., television, and sleep in luxurious beds. And they are continually in search of more of these things and more exceptional things. Eventually their happiness becomes dependent on these things, which becomes indispensable. They are not able to live contentedly by themselves because the only channel for accessing happiness is by way of these material things. Some people's happiness is completely tied up with these gratifying sense objects. If they have to do without, they become agitated, thinking, I must have these things, otherwise I'll die. In this case, they have utterly lost their independence. Those people who train themselves by way of the 8 precepts, however, are able to live simply and find it easier to access happiness. They gradually become more self-reliant and flexible, and thus maintain their independence. In regards to gratifying sense objects, they will say, I can take them or leave them. If I have them, I'm comfortable, but I can live without them. Even if I must lay on a mat or on a wooden floor, I can sleep. Moreover, they are less likely to suffer chronic back pain. Some people with chronic back pain are ordered by the doctors to sleep on the floor. Later, one may gain a new level of proficiency. One will recognize that these fancy and extravagant things are unnecessary. In reference to these things, one will say, I can take them or leave them, or even, if I have them, it's okay, but it's fine not to have them because I'll have more freedom and independence. Already, an initial training in these matters will bring about greater independence, enabling us to use our time more beneficially and to find it easier to experience happiness. We will be able to derive an adequate and ample value from sense objects. We won't be driven to increase the quantity or degree of these things, while our level of happiness remains the same. While dwelling alone, one is able to experience happiness. If one encounters pleasurable sense objects, one engages with them with wise discernment. They may supplement one's already existing happiness. Simply be aware that these things do not become essential for one's happiness, otherwise one will lose one's independence. In reference to the observance days, Upasaka, the Buddha encouraged people to use the time they would normally be seeking pleasurable sense experiences to engage in beneficial activities. Anavajakama, when one is not devoted to ministering to one's own personal pleasures, one is left with a lot of free time. On the observance days, one can use this spare time for wholesome purposes, say by seeking knowledge, reading Dhamma books, teaching children, meditating, helping orphans, or visiting the elderly. This is another stage of spiritual practice. When you have the opportunity, try and keep the Upasaka precepts once every 8 days. They are not that difficult and their benefits are great. They help maintain one's independence, enable one to live happily with few material possessions, are conducive to meditation and good health, enhance the quality of one's life, and provide one with extra time to engage in wholesome activities. G. Happiness of giving leads to peace in society. As mentioned earlier, the Buddha gave great importance to social happiness. The focus so far has been on internal spiritual qualities by demonstrating how people's wholesome mind states are connected to and have an effect on social happiness. The discussion has shown how people's happiness has many aspects, one of which is happiness on a social level. To complete this discussion, we need to also look at those principles pertaining to a more active engagement in society. We can begin by asking the question, when someone feels kindness and wishes to make others happy, or feels compassion and wishes for others to be freed from suffering, what is the most fundamental expression of these wholesome mind states? This is connected to a related question. What qualities did the Buddha most often speak about in relation to householders? The answer is giving, dana, that is, generosity. Buddhism begins with generosity. The Buddha presented a threefold practice for lay people called the 3 bases of meritorious action, Punnā Kariya Vatu, which is paired with a threefold training of the monastic community. Simply speaking, the threefold training, Tiso Sika, is the practice for the monks and nuns, while the 3 bases of meritorious action of generosity, dana, moral conduct, sila, and spiritual cultivation, bhavana, comprise the practice for lay people. The first factor of meritorious action is generosity, dana. In all the important groups taught by the Buddha of spiritual qualities pertaining to the general public, generosity is always the first factor. What does this term giving, dana, imply? It implies that, generally speaking, for the average person, the pursuit, possession, division, and consumption of material things are the most predominant activities, the main issue in people's lives. Of all these activities dealing with material things, they merge at the activity of consumption. What is the basic line of thinking? The basic mental preoccupation? For most people, due to the pressure of wanting to survive, people struggle to obtain things for themselves. This repeated thought pattern of trying to get things, to obtain things, eventually becomes habitual. It becomes an underlying tendency of the mind. Yet the pursuit, acquisition, and accumulation of things is relentless. People generally do not know what is enough. Moreover, material things are limited in number, giving rise to competition and oppression, which escalates until the whole world is in conflict. The solution to this problem begins with giving, with generosity. At the very least, generosity should be used to offset acquisitive tendencies. But if possible, one should embed this quality as a habit, as a natural disposition of the mind. If one only thinks about acquiring things, one will end up exploiting others, and one will experience inner turmoil. To balance the act of acquisition, it is thus essential to also practice generosity. Sharing with others is thus paired with the pursuit, acquisition, and consumption of things for one's own personal benefit. It is considered the fundamental spiritual quality for lay people and for the well-being of human society. Generosity acts as a foundation for developing higher spiritual qualities. The three bases of meritorious action, Buddhaghosacariya Vatu, provide a broad outline of such development as generosity, moral conduct, and cultivation of the mind. When the Buddha taught lay people whose knowledge of Dhamma was still at a beginning level, he would generally lay a gradual foundation by teaching what is referred to as the fivefold progressive instruction, Anupubhikata. This teaching begins with generosity, dana, which is then followed by a talk on morality, sila, kata, talk on heavenly pleasures, sugha, kata, and the disadvantages of sensual pleasures, kama, dinava, and the benefits of renunciation, nekamanisam. Generosity is part of the four principles of service, sanghavatu, the virtues making for social integration. Generosity, dana, kindly speech, payavacha, acts of service, atacharya, and even an equal treatment of others, samanatata. Generosity is the first factor in the 10 royal virtues, dasaraja dhamma, virtues of a ruler, generosity, dana, moral conduct, sila, self-sacrifice, parijaga, integrity, java, gentleness, madhava, self-control, tapa, non-anger, akrodha, non-violence, vihimsa, patience, kanti, and conformity to righteousness, avirodhana. Generosity is even the first factor in the 10 perfections, parami, the virtues perfected by bodhisattvas. Generosity, dana, moral conduct, sila, renunciation, nekama, wisdom, panya, effort, virya, patience, kanti, honesty, satya, determination, adhitthana, loving kindness, metta, and equanimity, upekkha. Generosity is the first factor in several other groups of spiritual qualities. Its importance is obvious. Even if one is starving and close to death, it is generosity that may save one's life. Generosity helps to alleviate suffering and generates happiness in societies that are competitive or oppressive due to the pursuit of personal pleasures. Besides its own inherent benefits, generosity is also a supporting factor for other qualities, including moral conduct, sila. The sharing of material things makes it easier for people to maintain virtuous conduct. On a basic level, when people receive things from others, they are less likely to try and seize them through unlawful means. People have varying degrees of moral steadfastness. Some people will not steal from others if they are not truly in need, but if they are destitute, they may revert to stealing as a way to survive. Generosity, say in the form of charity, can help this situation. Of course, there are some people who have a very weak immunity to immoral behavior and will try to seize things from others whenever they feel the slightest need. In such cases, one may need to come up with other ways to address this problem. In any case, when there is mutual sharing and caring, the incidents involving theft and violation of others' property will diminish. Generosity thus helps to protect moral standards in society. Generosity is also support for the cultivation of the mind. Even those practitioners who develop tranquility and insight meditation, samatha vipassana, prize the value of generosity. The Buddha stated how, in the context of tranquility and insight meditation, generosity is both an adornment of the mind, citta lakara, and an embellishment of the mind, citta parikara. The practice of generosity and self-sacrifice helps to enhance and beautify the mind. It makes the mind receptive, obliging, and intent on goodness. It fortifies the mind, integrates wholesome intentions, and prepares the mind for relinquishment. It makes the mind clear, spacious, relaxed, and bright. It is conducive to concentration, to mental purification, and to higher spiritual states. The delight and happiness of generosity alone is greatly beneficial to one's meditation, to the development of tranquility and insight. For this reason, lay people who have reached a level of awakening are still dedicated to the act of giving and sharing. The term dana encompasses a wide range of meanings, including generosity, charity, liberality, open-handedness, and hospitality. As mentioned earlier, it is the basis for a happy, harmonious society. Generosity is of key significance in Buddhism, both in the Buddhist teachings and in Buddhist history. Here in the Buddhist country of Thailand, one can observe that Thai people give easily, relinquish things easily, and are charitable by nature. Giving needs to be done correctly and carefully, however. It needs to be accompanied by wise reflection, by taking precautions against harmful side effects. Moreover, it needs to be integrated with other aspects of spiritual practice. One shouldn't think, I have reached this stage of meditation, I no longer need to participate in giving. This is incorrect. Generosity supports meditation practice. As mentioned above, it acts as an adornment for the mind, enabling one's tranquility and insight meditation to bear fruit. H. Sharing of material gains within the monastic community. So far, the emphasis has been on the lay community. Let us turn our attention to the monastic community. Do not believe that the life of the monastic community of the monks revolves only around formal meditation practice. The terms meditation or Dhamma practice can either be given a too narrow definition, or else their definitions are vague and ambiguous, to the point that one sometimes needs to avoid these terms or to use them with care. In fact, every valid activity of a monk can be described as Dhamma practice, and anyone, a monk or layperson who engages in proper giving, dana, need accord with this principle of Dhamma practice. By examining the monk's life in relation to the formal discipline, Vinaya, one sees how this life is communal, and one also sees how it is distinguished from lay life. The communal life of a monk, which is guided by formal discipline, is at heart connected to essential Dhamma principles because the gist of the Vinaya corresponds to the Dhamma, to principles or to teachings of truth. Yet this connection needs to be discerned accurately. The communal life of the monks is based on harmony, which is generated and sustained by way of the formal discipline. As soon as we focus here on harmony, we have immediately linked up with the Dhamma. At this point, we can look at those principles which act as a foundation for harmony. A repeated teaching in both the Sutta Pitaka and the Vinaya Pitaka is that on the 6 virtues conducive to communal life, Saranaya Dhamma, which are applied directly for sustaining the stability of the monastic community. This is a teaching for practical application. For example, 1 assesses the internal spiritual virtue of loving kindness and expresses it outwardly in daily life. These 6 virtues are given great importance in the context of monastic community life. Let us review these factors. Number 1, physical acts of loving kindness, metta kaya kamma, acting out of mutual consideration and cooperation. Number 2, verbal acts of loving kindness, metta Vachikama, speaking out of kindness and well-wishing. For example, one advises and offers instruction by using polite and courteous speech. Number 3, thinking of others with loving kindness. Metta Manokama, maintaining thoughts of well-wishing and concern for others, remaining in good spirits. Number 4, the sharing of gains. Sadharanabhogi or Sadharanabhagita, sharing one's material gains, say of requisites or food, with others so that everyone can partake of them. Sadharanabhogi literally means eating or consuming things as public common goods or the benefit of all. Keeping equal moral standards is Sila Samantana, keeping equal standards in light of the formal rules of conduct, the Vinaya. Refraining from making oneself objectionable or disagreeable to one's community. Number 6, being endowed with right views along with one's companions. Ditti Sammanata. To return to the subject of generosity, one may ask, since monks do not earn a livelihood, do not seek or accumulate material things, and do not own wealth or property, how are they able to give? Here we won't discuss the gift of Dhamma, Dhammadana, which in reference to monks is often paired with material gifts, Vatudana, Amisadana, by lay people. In regard to monks and material things, generosity or the act of giving is represented by the 4th factor of the virtuous, conducive to communal life above, namely the sharing of gains, sadharanabhogi. If one overlooks a study of the formal discipline, Vinayam, one will not appreciate the importance that Buddhism gives to people's relationship to material things. In the context of monastic life, the Buddha gave great emphasis to the sharing of material requisites. The Vinaya contains key principles and guidelines for sharing gains in a righteous and thorough way. Besides focusing on these matters of material gain, the Vinaya also addresses a system of communal living. Indeed, the sharing of gains is an aspect of communal life, and as stated earlier, the Vinaya is linked with the Dhamma at the principle of social harmony, samagi, which ensures social stability and happiness. If one is to truly understand Buddhism, one's focus should not simply be on the Dhamma teachings, which emphasize spiritual qualities. Buddhism is not merely a collection of Dhamma teachings. It also includes the Vinaya, which addresses social issues and material concerns. By having a more comprehensive overview, one will get to the heart of the term Dhamma Vinaya. Goodness in people's hearts actively supports society. Both in respect to the monastic community and the lay community, the basic foundation for social happiness rests with the same group of spiritual qualities: loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha, the 4 divine abidings, brahmavihara. But when establishing a system of practice in social situations, another set of factors must be defined, based on the foundation of spiritual qualities above, which can be applied in the domain of conventional reality. The 6 virtues conducive to communal life, Saranaya Dhamma, practiced by the monks, are based on the 4 divine abidings, but it is difficult to establish this same set of 6 virtues in the context of lay life. Take, for example, the 4th factor of equally distributing material gains. This is realistic and achievable in the monastic community, but very difficult to implement in everyday society. Generally, the best people can do in this context is to defer to this principle of sharing everything with others, or else they sidestep the issue altogether. For this reason, another group of factors was established as a practical guideline for lay society. If asked what these factors are, I wonder how many Buddhists are able to answer. As an aside, I have observed that lay Buddhists are generally not able to properly distinguish between internal spiritual factors and practical principles applied in external social circumstances. For example, many people refer to spiritual qualities like loving kindness and compassion and talk about them as if they are principles for practical application in society. This causes confusion and misunderstanding for the speaker as well as for others. See note 11.5, and note 11.5 is called Misunderstanding the Principles. Take, for example, the case of Dr. Joseph L. Sutton from Indiana University, who in 1962 came to work in Thailand during the time that the Gratitude School of Public Administration was founded at the National Institute of Development Administration, NIDA. Dr. Sutton wrote an analysis of Thai society in regards to Buddhism and development in his book, Problems of Politics and Administration in Thailand, Bloomington Institute of Training for Public Service, Department of Government, Indiana University, 1962. He cited a passage by Albert Schweitzer stating that in Buddhist societies, benevolent acts do not require any real action at all because according to the Buddhist teachings, all one needs to do is stay at home and spread thoughts of loving kindness. Here I am simply paraphrasing the passage. Thai people are probably at fault here by practicing incorrectly and giving Dr. Sutton the impression expressed in this passage. It thus behooves the Thai people to understand the Buddhist teachings correctly and to redeem themselves. Now back to the main text. As mentioned above, the 6 virtues conducive to communal life are based on the 4 divine abidings. Yet it is obvious that in this teaching, loving kindness is not simply an emotion stored in the heart. Rather, it is applied outwardly as physical acts of loving kindness, metta, kayakama, enthusiastic assistance of others, verbal acts of loving kindness, metta vachikama, and thoughts of loving kindness, metta manokama. In the context of lay society, the 4 divine abidings are expressed as principles of practical application in the teaching of the 4 bases of social solidarity. Sangha Vatu. Earlier, we discussed generosity, dana, in the context of inner development as part of the 3 bases of meritorious action, Puna Kiraya Vatu. Here, we will discuss generosity in the context of practical application for householders as part of the 4 bases of social solidarity. The 4 bases of social solidarity, Sangha Vatu, also referred to as principles of service, are virtues making for group integration, are applied to external social situations. They are paired with the internal spiritual factors of the 4 divine abidings. Number 1, generosity, dana. A. One gives to others in an ordinary situation in order to express one's love and well-wishing, one's kindness and consideration. This is giving with loving kindness. B. One gives to others who are distressed or sick in order to offer assistance. This is giving with compassion. C. One gives to others who have performed a benefit to society, for example, to a skilled inventor, in order to offer support and encouragement. This is giving with appreciative joy. Number 2, kindly speech, payavacha. A. One speaks kind, polite, and courteous words in ordinary situations. This is speech with loving kindness. B. One speaks comforting words and offers wise advice when others are confronted with difficulty. This is speech with compassion. C. One speaks words of rejoicing and admiration when others perform good deeds and engage in meritorious, wholesome acts. This is speech with appreciative joy. Number 3, acts of service, adhakaraya. A. One helps others and provides support by wishing them well. These are acts of service with loving kindness. B. One helps others by way of one's physical efforts or by way of one's wisdom and proficiency to escape from difficulty when they are faced with hardship and affliction, say from floods and fires or a workload exceeding their strength. These are acts of service with compassion. C. One helps others when they perform beneficial actions, for example, when they organize an almsgiving ceremony in a monastery by lending a hand and encouraging their acts of goodness. These are acts of service with appreciative joy. 4. Even and equal treatment, samanatata, fair and just treatment of others. This factor corresponds with equanimity, upeka. Equanimity is expressed by way of this even and equal treatment, by non-favoritism, by non-discrimination, by refraining from disparaging or exploiting others, by just behavior, and by integrating oneself and living in harmony with others. When one reaches the stage of practical application, one needs to engage on this level of the 4 principles of service. One should not simply recite the 4 divine abidings in a vague and ambiguous way. Otherwise, the criticisms, say by Western author mentioned in the last footnote are justified. Rather than condemn the critics, we should explain to them the truth of the matter. By practicing in accord with the four principles, one fosters happiness and harmony in one's community. One helps to create an environment conducive to each individual's well-being, success, and development. Moreover, acting in order to benefit society is inherently a form of self-development. For this reason, it is said that serving others is a form of spiritual practice. By acting in order to benefit others, one automatically benefits and develops oneself. Take, for example, a bodhisattva who engages in Dhamma practice and develops the perfections, parami, by helping others. Indeed, the very act of helping others constitutes his or her Dhamma practice. In order to effectively help others, one must apply wisdom and skill and be cultivating an advanced stage of spiritual practice. By successfully helping others, we ourselves undergo a spiritual transformation. Our wisdom faculty and other spiritual capabilities are strengthened. In order to practice the Dhamma correctly, one must thus accord with two teachings by the Buddha. First, the Buddha presented the pair of factors consisting of non-harming of oneself and non-harming of others. Second, he taught the pair of factors tending to personal well-being, attatha, and attending to the well-being of others, paratha. The second teaching less commonly consists of three factors: self-benefit, attatha, benefit of others, paratha, and mutual benefit, ubhayatha. These two factors of attending to one's own personal matters and attending to the concerns of others are always paired with one another. J, mutual assistance benefits everyone. In terms of the monastic community, apart from emphasizing the sharing of material gains, the Buddha also gave great emphasis to communal harmony, samagi. This harmony stands in contrast to a schism in the Sangha, Sangha Bheda, Bheda, which, if created intentionally, counts as one of the 5 crimes bringing about immediate results. Anantaraya Kama, the most severe form of evil deed. This reveals the prime importance the Buddha gave to communal harmony. For the lay community, the Buddha also emphasized the importance of unity and concord by maintaining the 4 bases of social solidarity, Sangha, Vatu. Of all the Buddha's male lay disciples who were praised as being preeminent, Ittadaga, there are 2 who stand out as supreme: the householder Citta, who was foremost at preaching the Dhamma, and Hatthaka, who was foremost in uniting other people. Hatthaka was proficient in creating communal harmony by way of the 4 bases of social solidarity. As a leader, he was able to use these 4 factors to bring about a firm and stable harmony amongst his community. The Buddha praised these 2 individuals as being the standard bearers of the Buddhist male lay community. The female lay community also contained a pair of supreme disciples who acted as standard bearers: Kujutara, who was foremost in great knowledge, and Nandamata, foremost in meditative proficiency. The reason why I am emphasizing this subject is that contemporary Buddhists seem to view Buddhism as a matter of dealing almost exclusively with the individual. They do not seem to realize the importance the Buddha gave to communal and social issues. I believe Buddhists need to establish a more balanced perspective. In sum, the relation to the monastic community, the Buddha emphasized the principle of harmony, samagi, while in relation to the lay community, he emphasized the 4 bases of social solidarity, Sangha Vatu. In both cases, the focal point is communal harmony. In the case of the monks and nuns, the Buddha spoke in a more general, abstract sense, whereas in regard to the laity, he spoke about material possessions. Buddhism thus gives great emphasis to communal and social issues, which are intimately connected to personal issues. Granted, personal issues are an essential aspect of spiritual practice. For people to develop spiritually, things must proceed according to the laws of nature pertaining to the individual. Even on the level of the body, after swallowing food, we must digest it ourselves. No one can help us do this. If we are unable to swim, no amount of strident instructions by another or even divine intervention will enable us to swim. If we are unable to do multiplication, our friends cannot calculate the answer and beam it into our brains. If we are suffering, no matter how much others love us, they won't be able to imbue us with happiness. And if we lack wisdom, others are unable to infuse us with it. For this reason, one must be able to rely on oneself, one must train oneself and cultivate the necessary natural conditions oneself. Having said this, Buddhism recognizes the well-wishing support and encouragement by others as an essential external condition for people's spiritual development. As guides and teachers, wise and well-meaning people are able to apply social systems to act as a catalyst for initiating natural dynamics within an individual, most notably wise reflection. Once these dynamics set in, the process of development reaches fulfillment. This is how other people are able to help. To begin with, they express kindness and well-wishing, and then they actively assist as an external influence. For example, a teacher provides instructions to foster wisdom in his or her pupils, but if the pupils do not wish to learn, the teaching is in vain. The teacher is unable to automatically transfer knowledge into the pupils' minds. The pupils need to combine this teaching with internal factors. When one knows how to investigate, is determined to listen, and possesses skillful reflection, yoniso manasikara, the information one has learned, referred to as sutta, is transformed into wisdom. The teacher is unable to inject this wisdom into the student. I have often pointed out how lay people go to monks and ask for moral conduct. They chant, Mayam Bhante Tisarena Saha Pancha Sila Ya Chama. We request the 5 precepts, yet the monks reply, we are unable to confer on you moral conduct. This is something you must develop yourself. So what is to be done? The monks know the moral rectitude arises from proper spiritual practice. It is not something that one person can give to another. They thus tell the lay people, after reciting these precepts, go and keep them, go and follow them. True morality will then arise within you. The lay people ask for morality, sila, and the monks give them precepts or training rules. Sikhapada, they recite, Panatipata Veramani Sikhapadam Samadhiyami. I undertake the precept of refraining from harming living creatures, etc. By keeping the precepts, morality arises within the individual. Lay people may ask for concentration from the monks, who will reply in a similar way, saying, this is not something I can bestow on you, you must develop it yourself, but I can teach you meditation techniques for you to practice. By developing these, you will generate concentration. The same goes for wisdom. The monks will reply, I can't give you wisdom, but I can share information and teachings for you to reflect on and investigate. In this way, you will generate wisdom within yourself. When lay people ask for morality, the monks give them precepts to undertake. When lay people ask for concentration, the monks give them meditation techniques to develop. When lay people ask for wisdom, the monks give them teachings to examine. To sum up, spiritual practice vis-a-vis society acts as service for one's community or society, bears 2 important fruits on the personal level. First, when one acts for the benefit of society, say by offering assistance to others, these very actions constitute spiritual practice. They are an exceptional opportunity for spiritual practice. Second, by acting in this way, one creates a conducive environment for spiritual practice, which benefits everyone, including oneself. The second factor is very important. If society is filled with turmoil and oppression, how is one able to practice the Dhamma? Studying, seeking out books, sitting in meditation, all of these activities are obstructed. In the monastic community, it is essential that the monks foster peace, harmony, and cooperation, creating a conducive atmosphere for each individual to engage in Dhamma practice and to perform regular duties conveniently and at ease. A peaceful community enables people to increase their acts of service for others, which in turn increases the personal benefits mentioned above, strengthening a wholesome cycle. Buddhism gives great emphasis to society. When examining Buddhism, one should not look solely at the Dhamma teachings, rather one should also investigate the formal discipline, the Vinaya. Moreover, there are distinct spiritual factors which help to bridge the Dhamma and the Vinaya, and which are highlighted in regard to one's relationship to society and the material world. When one performs good deeds for society with a mind of kindness and compassion, one experiences joy and delight. When one thus obtains a vital spiritual factor. When one witnesses someone become freed from suffering, one's joy increases. By helping others, one's society becomes more joyous, and one's own happiness grows, which is conducive to other spiritual factors. In this context, bear in mind these 2 groups of factors. In relation to society, one applies the 4 bases of social solidarity, Sangha Vatu, which are based on the 4 divine abidings of loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. The 4 bases of solidarity create a collective happiness. In relation to the individual, one is endowed with the 5 factors constituting concentration of the Dhamma Samadhi, joy, delight, tranquility, happiness, and concentration. These factors facilitate spiritual practice and act as internal assets or a personal capital. In particular, one should try and foster the first factor of pamoja, joy, cheerfulness, gladness. Awakened beings, including stream enterers, act as exemplars in this context. The Buddha described how noble beings maintain both personal happiness and social happiness. He compared stream enterers who diligently attend to both their individual practice and to communal activities and helping others with a mother cow who, while grazing, looks over her shoulder to look after her calf, checking to see that it gets enough to eat. Monks, just as a cow with a young calf, while she grazes, watches her calf, so too, that is the character of a person who is accomplished in right view, i.e. stream enterer. Indeed, a noble disciple attends earnestly to those necessary affairs concerning his companions in the holy life, yet he is also ardently attentive to the training in higher morality, the training in higher mind, and the training in higher wisdom. M.I. 324. The Buddha wished for people to behave in similar ways as those stream enterers. K. The wise learn from suffering. It is now time to reiterate the advantages and disadvantages of happiness. But before we do, let me say some more about suffering, because one must pass beyond suffering in order to reach happiness, and suffering too has advantages and disadvantages. People dislike suffering because it is oppressive, stifling, troubling, and frustrating. This is the very definition of suffering, and so it's normal that people find it displeasurable. A person endowed with wise reflection, yoniso manasikara, however, is able to benefit from suffering. How so? When people are oppressed by suffering and feel frustrated, they struggle to escape. If they know how to strive correctly, however, besides increasing the likelihood of successfully escaping the suffering, the endeavor makes them strong, provides them with valuable life experiences, and is conducive to spiritual growth on many levels. If people are able to reflect wisely and develop the proper relationship to suffering, they will prosper. But if they deal with suffering incorrectly, besides remaining caught up in it, they will aggravate the situation. Take, for example, someone who is born poor or destitute. If he is unable to reflect on his situation wisely, but instead sits around miserable, depressed, and despairing, he simply exacerbates the suffering and seeks deeper into misfortune. If he responds to the situation correctly, however, strives to rectify it and reflects wisely, he is able to overcome that suffering and may even reach great success. Occasionally, the struggle to escape from suffering becomes established as a social system. Take, for example, the system of market economy competition, which is spreading from the West and becoming the dominant world economic system as part of what we call globalization. This system of competition compels people to struggle with the pressures of suffering. It is strongly connected to the doctrine of every man for himself, or the system of individualism. As one struggles without being able to rely on anyone else for help, one must be fiercely determined and generate energy. This makes people strong, proactive, and constantly ambitious. A certain diligence and vigilance is required to succeed in this system, which results in progress. A deeper analysis of how desirable this progress is, or what pros and cons this system of competition has, will have to wait for another time. In any case, the diligence arising from the pressure of this competitive system is not true diligence, because it is simply a reaction and struggle against a feeling of coercion. It is not diligence stemming from wisdom, and it leaves many problems in its wake, both personal, e.g. stress, and social, e.g. the absence of relationships based on friendliness and goodwill. Many of these problems consequently require great effort to solve. Having said this, a diligent and vigilant person is still better than someone wallowing in heedlessness and indulgence. Occasionally, leaders in society must apply or even generate this kind of pseudo-diligence in order to rouse people from their slumber. This is better than allowing them to sink into heedlessness, curl up in depression, or be at a complete loss over what to do. People should learn how to benefit from suffering. When afflicted by suffering, they will then make effort and grow strong, and they will look for skillful ways to solve problems, to free themselves from suffering. The attempt to free oneself from suffering is an opportunity to develop oneself spiritually. First and foremost, one develops wisdom. By the time one has solved a problem and passed beyond it, one's wisdom is sharper. All aspects of one's life will be developed and become more proficient, including one's physical behavior, speech, and mind. Moreover, one will become more mentally strong. For example, one's mindfulness and concentration will be improved. One can thus learn how to benefit from suffering. For this reason, the Buddha stated that a wise person can be happy even when encountering difficulty. One is able to be happy even amidst suffering. Suffering can thus be a boon if one is able to benefit from it. 11.11 Conclusion. Happiness is reached by happiness. In order to clarify the Buddha's viewpoint on happiness, let us return to the passage cited at the beginning of this chapter, stating that the highest goal of Buddhism is to be reached by way of happiness, or by way of a practice endowed with happiness. It is not to be reached through suffering, or by way of a practice of pain. On one occasion, Prince Bodhi had the following conversation with the Buddha. Prince Bodhi: Venerable Sir, I believe thus. Happiness is not to be gained through happiness. Happiness is to be gained through pain. Buddha: Prince, before my awakening, while I was still only an unenlightened bodhisattva, I too thought thus. Happiness is not to be gained through happiness. Happiness is to be gained through pain. The Buddha went on to say that due to his thinking, he went forth as a renunciate and studied under both Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta until he had gained the same knowledge as these two eminent teachers. He then traveled further until he arrived at Sinanigama near Uruvela and undertook extreme ascetic practices, tormenting himself in various ways and fasting until his body was emaciated. Because of eating so little, my limbs became like the jointed segments of an 80-stem vines or black stem vines, ... My haunches became like a camel's hoof, ... The projections on my spine stood forth like corded beads, ... My ribs jutted out as gaunt as the rafters of an old roofless barn, ... My eyes sank far down in their sockets, looking like the reflection of stars in a deep well, ... My scalp shriveled and withered as a freshly cut bitter gourd shrivels and withers in the wind and sun, ... My belly skin adhered to my backbone. Thus, if I rubbed my belly skin, I touched my backbone. And if I rubbed my backbone, I touched my belly skin. If I urinated or defecated, I staggered and fell over there. Because of eating so little, if I tried to ease my body by rubbing my limbs with my hands, the hair rotted at its root, fell from my body as I rubbed. In the end, the Bodhisattva reflected, whatever recluses or Brahmins in the past, ... in the future, ... in the present, have experienced painful, racking, piercing feelings due to exertion. This is the utmost. There is none beyond this. But by this racking practice of austerities, I have not attained any superhuman states, any distinction in knowledge and vision worthy of the noble ones. Could there be another path to awakening? I considered. I clearly recall that during the plowing ceremony of my father, the Sakyan king, I was sitting in the cool shade of a jambolan tree, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, and I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Could that be the path to awakening? Then, following on that memory, came the realization, this is the path to awakening. I asked myself, am I afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? And I thought, I am not afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. MII 93. The Bodhisattva then ate solid food, restoring his strength. He practiced the jhanas up to the fourth jhana and subsequently was fully awakened. The Buddhist practice for reaching the highest goal incorporates happiness. The caveat here, however, is that a practitioner must not get caught up in the happiness nor allow it to overwhelm the mind. The mind remains independent, allowing the person to progress to higher states and to eventually realize complete deliverance. Having reached this liberation, one is able to enjoy all levels of happiness without it dominating the mind or leading to infatuation and difficulty. On some occasions, when drawing a comparison or when playing on words, the Buddha referred to the assiduous practice of the four jhanas as an indulgence in happiness. Sukhalakanu yoga, but it is beneficial indulgence conducive to awakening. The reason the Buddha defended the practice of the jhanas is that renunciates at that time tended to undertake severe practices of self-mortification. In comparison, the Buddhist monastic practices appeared easy and comfortable. Members of other religious traditions frequently criticized the Buddhist monks for being lax, as is seen in this passage. It may be, Kunda, that wanderers of other sects might say, the ascetics, the sons of the Sakyan, are preoccupied by and devoted to pleasure, indulge in pleasure. If so, they should be asked, what kind of devotion to pleasure, Sukhalakanu yoga, indulgence in pleasure? For this devotion and pleasure can take many different forms. There are, Kunda, 4 kinds of devotion to pleasure which are low, vulgar, worldly, ignoble, and not conducive to welfare, not leading to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to tranquility, to realization, to awakening, to nibbana. What are they? Firstly, a foolish person takes pleasure and delight in killing living beings, takes pleasure and delight in taking that which is not given, takes pleasure and delight in telling lies, gives himself up to the indulgence in and enjoyment of the pleasures of the 5 senses, There are 4 kinds of devotion to pleasure which are entirely conducive to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to tranquility, to realization, to awakening, to nibbana. What are they? Here a monk, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, enters upon and abides in the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana. Dii 130 to 132. B. Proper attitude towards happiness. There are 3 chief principles in Buddhism pertaining to a proper attitude towards happiness as confirmed by this teaching of the Buddha. Monks, how is exertion fruitful? How is striving fruitful? Here a monk in this Dhamma and discipline, 1, does not create suffering for himself when he is not beset by suffering. 2, does not forsake genuine happiness. 3, does not become infatuated with that happiness, i.e. even with genuine happiness. MII 2:22-3. The Buddha did not end the teaching here. He went on to describe another vital stage of practice, which can be classified as a 4th principle, that is, to strive in order to completely eradicate the cause of suffering. This 4th factor is the decisive criterion for reaching the final goal of Buddhism, because in order to realize the highest truth, one must first completely remove the causes for suffering. From the perspective of gradual Dhamma practice, this 4th principle can be expressed in another way: to strive in order to realize higher forms of happiness until one reaches the supreme happiness, which is utterly free from suffering. One can thus outline the practice in regard to happiness. The set of criteria for Buddhists in their relationship to happiness is 4-fold. 1, to not create suffering for oneself in times without suffering. 2, not to abandon genuine happiness. 3, not to indulge even in this genuine happiness. And 4, to strive to put an end to the cause of suffering, to strive to realize supreme happiness. Although these principles of practice in relation to happiness exist, the subtlety and depth of understanding vis-a-vis happiness differs between people, which is a factor that needs to be taken into consideration. For example, the practice of someone who sees the danger in sense pleasure, who is disillusioned by it, and seeks more refined forms of happiness may involve stages that are arduous, and this practice is viewed by those people who are still attached to sense pleasure as a form of self-inflicted suffering. In such circumstances, for those practitioners who are prepared, who are disenchanted with sense pleasure, and for whom sense pleasure has become a form of hardship, or even for those people who are not yet fully prepared, but who see the danger in sense pleasure and who see the value of and aspire to more refined, independent forms of happiness, these arduous forms of practice become a means for training themselves. If these people had acted voluntarily and they did not fall into the extreme of self-mortification, the Buddha consented to this practice as a form of spiritual training. Moreover, some aspects of the lives of those who have experienced more refined forms of happiness are viewed by those people attached to sense pleasures as miserable or painful. The reverse is also true. Those people who have experienced more refined forms of happiness see aspects of the lives of those caught up in sense pleasure as suffering. In any case, those people who have experienced higher forms of happiness know this happiness for themselves. Therefore, the question of whether Buddhism ultimately prizes pleasure or prizes pain, whether it is a hedonistic or an extreme ascetic or machoistic teaching, can be cast aside, for it is neither of these. The question that remains here pertains to the evaluation or significance of different kinds of happiness. That is, one faces a choice between sense pleasure, which depends on external things, and more refined kinds of happiness, which are internal, self-generated, and independent. In the scriptures, refined happiness is determined as more important. In some, one should access refined forms of happiness, or at the very least, one should experience both sense pleasure and refined happiness. That is, one should at least match the realization of stream enterers and once returners who still enjoy sense pleasure, yet have reached an unfettered internal happiness as well. A general principle for advancing from sense pleasure to more refined happiness, from the pleasure of consuming to an independent happiness, is spiritual preparedness and discipline. A corresponding principle is that all people should experience righteous forms of happiness that are appropriate to their standing in life, or that result from their individual perseverance and self-discipline. Those people who are in want of both kinds of advantageous happiness, that is, they are deprived of sense pleasures, and they have not made the effort to reach higher forms of happiness, are considered misdirected and incompetent. In this sense, those bhikkhus who have renounced sense pleasure yet do not make the effort to reach more refined forms of happiness, or whose practice is fruitless, are dissolute. They miss a valuable opportunity and are considered more unfortunate and pitiable than lay people who indulge in sense pleasure. The Buddha said, "It is in such a way, monks, that a clansman has gone forth. Yet he is covetous, inflamed by lust for sensual pleasures, with a mind full of ill will, with evil intentions, muddled mind, lacking clear comprehension, unconcentrated, scatterbrained, unrestrained in his sense faculties. Just as a stick of wood from a funeral pyre, burning at both ends and smeared with excrement in the middle, cannot be used as timber either in the village or in the forest, in such a way do I speak about this person. He has missed out on the enjoyments of a householder, yet he does not fulfill the goal of a life of renunciation." SIII 93, IT 89-90. C. Spiritual practice in relation to happiness. Using sense pleasure as a guideline, one can summarize the Buddhist attitude towards happiness in the following way. D. Enjoyment of sense pleasure. A. Stage of excellence. To enjoy sense pleasures while at the same time being familiar with more refined kinds of happiness. This refined happiness acts as a safeguard and guarantee, keeping the enjoyment of sense pleasures within wholesome and virtuous limits, preventing the creation of problems for oneself and others, and generating benefits to all. Here one discerns the dangers and drawbacks of sense pleasure. One knows moderation, and one avoids heedlessness. For example, in terms of sexual relations, married people are content with their spouses, sadhara santosa, and live together righteously by being faithful to one another and encouraging each other to grow in virtue and reach higher forms of happiness, as is seen in the case of the awakened disciples Nakula Pitta and Nakulamata. B. Wholesome stage. Although one enjoys sense pleasure in a morally upright way, one is still cut off from more refined forms of happiness. This enjoyment resembles the stage of excellence above. One sees the dangers in sense pleasure and acknowledges that sense pleasure is inevitably accompanied by a certain degree of suffering. One tries to minimize the harm created by sense pleasure, one is moderate and abstains from indulgence, and one tries to be of benefit to both oneself and others. But because one lacks the way out and the surety of more refined happiness, one is still at risk of being enticed by things and falling knee-deep into sense indulgence. One is not yet safe. C. Inferior stage. To be caught up in sense pleasure, to be obsessed with the pursuit of sense pleasure and personal gratification. For example, in regard to eating or sexual relations, one is impelled to feel arousal, excitement, and agitation that exceeds what can be called the requirements of nature vis-a-vis eating and reproduction. One may devise methods and means for stimulating this excitement and agitation by using one's natural urges simply as a fuel to light the fire. One then increases the passion, making it frequent or continual, even to the extent of perversion. In such circumstances, eating food which does not necessarily nourish the body, or having sex removed from the act of reproduction, will be accentuated until the person entirely forgets the original purpose of these actions. These activities will be pursued solely to satisfy craving. It will be an indulgence in sense pleasure for its own sake. One's life will be entirely dedicated to consuming things. On a social level, when people go beyond the simple relief or natural urges and inclinations to the deliberate creation of excitement and agitation, to the extent that this becomes rampant, that society exists as if in a constant state of warfare, which one can call the battlefield of sense desire. In times of literal war, people are incited to feel hatred and resentment over and above the natural feelings people have of anger and indignation. Eventually, people are prepared to slaughter and destroy each other, and there is even an expressed admiration and satisfaction in such destruction. This escalation of people's feelings by sense desire is similar. Incitement and stimulation generates lust and a fixation on consuming things, exceeding the natural desire inherent in people. This intensified desire is a partner to and the origin of the battle of hatred. People who normally live at ease and act in positive ways become provoked by sense desire, giving rise to stress and agitation. They can no longer bear to live at ease. They are then incited to feel anger and discontentment until the only satisfaction they can find is through destruction. When this battle of sense desire is protracted, and there are added factors like stimulating and provocative advertisements, people will have a proclivity to not see others as human companions or even as human. Instead, they will see others as prey, as objects to consume, or as objects of enjoyment. They will expect to derive pleasure from other people, and if others do not provide this expected pleasure, they will view them as rivals or impediments, or as offensive, useless, loathsome, and irritating. When people are engrossed in the pursuit of sense pleasure, it will be difficult for them to generate a wholesome enthusiasm for their work. They will lack a love of their work, and lack determination and one-pointedness of mind. Wholesome enthusiasm will be replaced by craving. People will simply wait for an opportunity to indulge in sense pleasure and perform activities in order to gain some personal advantage. The performing of work in order to achieve true success and excellence will vanish. People will work simply to complete the task or to create a semblance of completion. Moreover, they will seek sense pleasure by taking shortcuts, which do not require any effort and lead to immoral behavior and crime. When people begin to see each other as prey and as competitors, and are preoccupied with the pursuit of sense pleasure, and zealously guard the objects they have seized, mutual mistrust, envy, and abuse will spread. In this state of affairs, it will be difficult for people to experience refined forms of happiness, even the simple pleasures of appreciating friendship and mutual kindness, or the delight and peace stemming from opening oneself up to the beauty of nature. People will be unfamiliar with the refreshing sense of ease that accompanies inner dignity and virtue. When people lack this refreshing sense of ease, their mental health will drop to a critical level. This is because sense pleasure on its own, devoid of such refined and wholesome mental qualities like love, compassion, and generosity, inflames the mind and is not conducive to mental health. If people associate with one another spurred on by lust, each party will be seeking to get something from the other. Although they may experience pleasure, it is likely to be detrimental to their mental health. Furthermore, relating to other people in order to obtain a personal advantage, working not for the sake of the work, but in order to get a reward, and struggling to compete with others, leads to disappointment, mistrust, vexation, and enmity, all of which blight the heart and damage mental health. Although a society may be materially prosperous, if it has fallen into such a state of indulgence, its citizens will not experience true happiness. Rather, they will be subject to severe forms of suffering, including feelings of desolation, fragility, and meaninglessness. In a society deprived of individuals who are familiar with deeper forms of peace and happiness, there is no source of such happiness even for those people who are in extreme need of it. In a society inclined towards sensual indulgence, there will be many people who have either been disappointed by their experiences connected to sense pleasure, or they have been impacted negatively in some other way. Some people will respond by feeling disillusioned by sense pleasure, or they will go to an opposite extreme and feel hatred towards sense pleasure. They will add to the ranks of those people, for example, the old and invalid, who no longer have the capacity to enjoy sense pleasures to the full. These individuals are either unable to fully enjoy sense pleasure, or else they have an aversion to sense pleasure. If they have no access to an internal happiness, they will experience serious mental difficulties. If they still have adequate physical strength, they may seek an escape by using intoxicants or addictive substances, creating additional problems for society. When the flood of sense cravings overflows the banks and people do not reform themselves in time, the corrupted society will waste away and devour itself, and the civilization will collapse. E. Abandonment of sense pleasure. A stage of excellence. To experience a genuine, internal, independent, and refined kind of happiness, which is complete in itself, here a person has gone beyond a desire for sense pleasure. He or she will automatically and naturally refrain from inclining or circling back towards a pursuit of sense pleasure. Such a person is utterly free from the problems arising from sense desire. B. Wholesome stage. The abandonment of sense pleasure of those who aspire to and practice in order to reach more refined forms of happiness. This abandonment is suitable for those who are disenchanted with sense pleasure and are prepared to train in order to reach higher forms of happiness, or even for those who may not have reached the stage of disenchantment, but who see the danger in sensuality, recognize the value of, and wish to experience more independent kinds of happiness. and voluntarily take up a spiritual practice for this sake. This willingness for and self-awareness in practice helps to prevent the ill effects resulting from repression and overly forceful effort. Whenever one no longer wishes to train, or when the faith for training is truly depleted, one should acknowledge defeat and stop. For example, if one has been ordained as a bhikkhu, one voluntarily gives up the monastic training. Although repeatedly being ordained and disrobing is not recommended, if someone does this with sincerity, it can still help to foster spiritual preparedness and can be considered a valid part of training, as is seen in the example of Venerable Sariputta, who was ordained and disrobed 7 times before he finally reached the fruit of arhatship. See inferior stage. To abandon sense pleasure out of reactivity and resistance, and to subsequently fall into an opposite extreme. Here one undertakes severe and punishing ascetic practices, piling up suffering for oneself by targeting one's body or life in one's loathing for sense pleasure. This self-torment or exaggerated reaction, which lacks the understanding and self-awareness described in the previous stage B, creates additional forms of mental problems. Bear in mind that Buddhism considers the non-harming of oneself to be a vital principle and equally a form of Dhamma practice as refraining from harming others. Those people who have been overly forceful in practice or who have reacted to sense pleasure by extreme forms of behavior should switch to the training described in the previous stage B. Buddhism teaches to discern and acknowledge things as they truly are, and to train oneself in order to progressively develop in the Dhamma. Although Dhamma practitioners have different degrees of maturity and are at different stages of development, they live together harmoniously and support one another, promoting genuine well-being and encouraging each person's spiritual growth. They do not bully or disparage each other. Together, they build an environment of peace, friendliness, dignity, prosperity, and happiness. F. Perfect happiness. Here we arrive at the highest happiness, which in Buddhism is succinctly described as Nibbana Paramam Sukham. Nibbana is the supreme happiness. When one has made initial contact with supreme happiness, or even when simply referring to it, one should be familiar with its main attributes so that one can check whether one's own happiness is going in the right direction and how it can be improved, how its advantages may be increased and its disadvantages lessened. There are 3 main attributes to this supreme or perfect happiness. Number 1, it is constant. It needs not be searched for. It is an inherent quality of the heart. Number 2, it is free. It is not dependent on anything else. For example, it is not reliant on sense objects. Number 3, it is pure, it is complete, there remains no latent or lingering suffering. Supreme happiness is constant because it has become an inherent feature of one's life. For this reason, one need not search for it. The Buddha, for example, was always happy wherever he went. When he journeyed into forests and mountains, when he was with other people, and when he was alone, because happiness was an indwelling quality in his heart. Supreme happiness is independent and free. This differs altogether from sense pleasure, which is completely dependent on external material things. Sense pleasure requires a pursuit and appropriation of things. One must look after and guard these things zealously. One loses one's own independence, and one vies with others, leading to conflict and oppression. By developing independent happiness, one is inwardly free, and one need not compete with anyone else. Supreme happiness is pure and complete. No disturbances or irritations remain in the mind. Many people claim that they are happy, but deep down there still remains suffering or the causes for suffering. For example, they may still have latent anxiety, fear, distrust, melancholy, boredom, or loneliness. Their purported happiness is not spacious, clear, and full. When all the causes for suffering have been removed from the mind, happiness is replete. There remains no latent suffering that could disturb the mind. If one wishes to experience other forms of happiness, one can do this fully. One is inherently happy, and one is prepared to experience all forms of happiness to the utmost satisfaction. Take arhats, for example, who are endowed with this inherent and complete happiness at all times. Besides abiding in this complete happiness, they are also able to experience other forms of happiness according to their wishes, and they experience these forms of happiness to the fullest measure. When arhats have free time and are not engaged in other activities, they may enter the 4 jhanas and enjoy the bliss of jhana sukha. They use the jhanas to abide at ease in the present, Buddhadhamma sukha vihara, and they derive the utmost joy from these states of jhana because no latent irritations or annoyances remain in the mind. This stands in contrast to those unawakened human beings who may be able to access jhana, but who still have the root or seeds of suffering lingering in their minds. Their joy is not truly spacious and free. In the Magandhaya Sutta mentioned earlier, the Buddha states that if one has not yet realized this profound happiness, there is no guarantee that one will not fall back and seek out sense pleasure once more. But if one does have this realization, there is no way that one will consider seeking gratification by way of sense pleasure. This is similar to adults who observe children playing and pretending to be shopkeepers. They won't feel that behaving in this way themselves will provide happiness. This is not because they cannot engage in this activity, but because they have experienced higher forms of happiness. With the natural development of happiness, the mind will automatically respond in this way. To sum up, arhats are endowed with an inner happiness that is present at all times, and they are able to enjoy other forms of happiness fully according to their desire. If it so happens that they do not take pleasure in other forms of happiness, this is because they have passed beyond the associated desire and have access to higher happiness. G. Acting for the happiness of all. Because their happiness is complete and spacious, arhats are able to immediately derive delight from wholesome things. For example, when they come into contact with nature, say by ascending a mountain or entering a forest, their delight is spontaneous and instant, free from any inner obstruction or impediment. This is in contrast to people who still harbor the seeds of suffering. When they arrive at a delightful place, myriad thoughts and emotions disturb their mind, like worry, anxiety, unease, and thoughts of rivalry, commerce, politics, etc. This prevents them from being happy, and even if they are happy, their happiness is limited. Arhats, on the other hand, find happiness wherever they go. Even unfavorable environments become a source of delight. This happiness does not extend only to themselves. Other people who live in their company experience ease and comfort in places that previously caused disquiet and turmoil. Note the verse in the Dhammapada. Whether in village or in forest, or on hill or in dale, wherever arhats dwell, delightful indeed is that spot. And that's Dhammapada verse 98. Wherever arhats dwell, they themselves are joyous, and people surrounding them are delighted. Arhats are able to view offensive and disagreeable things as pleasant and agreeable. Because they have mastery over their perceptions, they have developed the sense faculties, bhavitindriya. This demonstrates the human potential for happiness corresponding to spiritual development. If one practices the Dhamma correctly, happiness gradually increases in this way. And when happiness is complete, all other spiritual qualities are complete. This follows a natural process like a hen incubating an egg. If the conditions are present, the chick will hatch with certainty. There is no room for doubt. As mentioned earlier, it is valid to describe Buddhism as a system of developing happiness or as a process of eliminating suffering, or one may use any other description that is in line with Dhamma and accords with nature. They all refer to the same thing. Before we finish, there is one more subject to touch upon. Complete, perfect happiness has attributes that are expressed outwardly. Arhats have completed their spiritual training and brought happiness to perfection. Indeed, all their spiritual qualities are fulfilled, converging at wisdom, the supreme knowledge of awakening, which leads to deliverance. They relate to things in a correct and balanced way. Arhats are given the epithet kata karanaya, those who have done what had to be done. Nothing remains to be done in order to bring about a state of completion, or in in order to make themselves happy. Nothing is left unfinished in their spiritual training and development. Their spiritual development is complete. They are adepts, asika. They are fully developed, bhavita. What does one do when there remains no personal business to attend to, nothing to be done in order to be happy or to develop oneself spiritually? One is still alive, one is consummate in virtuous conduct, mental proficiency, and wisdom, and one is brimful of extraordinary experience. The answer is one uses all of one's remaining energy to foster the well-being of the many folk. It is a Buddhist principle that someone who realizes Nibbana acts for the welfare of the world. As mentioned above, wisdom leads to the liberation of the mind. Liberated individuals are fully prepared to respond to those people who are still afflicted by suffering. They generate genuine compassion and devote themselves to alleviating the sufferings of others. This is the essential task of arhats. It is normal for people to vent their suffering outwards. If they use their speech carefully to express their suffering, it can ease the tension, and there is a good possibility that this will help to solve their difficulties. But if they are heedless with speech, the expression of suffering may escalate into physical gestures of violence, causing much trouble and turmoil for others. Happiness, too, can be radiated outwards, and those individuals who are replete in happiness and whose minds are liberated wish to facilitate the mental emancipation of others. Arhats are similar to people who have freed themselves from shackles and chains. When all personal distress and affliction has been quelled, they feel compassion for others who are still bound, and they want to offer assistance. They then spend the majority of their time trying to help others be free. When the Buddha was sending the first group of 60 arhats out to proclaim the Buddha's teachings, he said that both he and they were similar in being liberated from all snares and bonds, both human and divine. He went on to say, Bhikkhus wander forth for the welfare and happiness of the many folk, for the compassionate assistance of the world. This is the motto of all arhats. Having completed all personal affairs and duties, they dedicate their lives for the good of the world, just as the Buddha did. From the very beginning, spiritual practice is twofold. It involves both self-discipline and assisting others. Occasionally, as is the case of bodhisattvas, an increased emphasis is given to the latter of helping others. These two aspects of practice are intimately connected, for helping others is one way to promote self-development. All aspects of spiritual practice, whether one focuses on personal training or focuses on helping others, are part of one's spiritual development. As long as one has not finished what has to be done, both aspects of practice are part of this personal development. When one has brought spiritual development to completion and accomplished all of one's spiritual responsibilities, one's entire life is devoted to others. As mentioned above, those who realize Nibbana act for the welfare of the world. Here, the complete and perfect happiness inherent in an individual radiates outward and becomes the happiness of all. The core Buddhist teaching on happiness is the highest goal of spiritual practice, and the other core teachings on happiness as the highest aim of fulfilling one's responsibility towards others as a Buddhist are united. The teaching Nibbana is the supreme happiness is integrated with the teaching for the welfare and happiness of the many folk, for the compassionate assistance of the world. The highest reality of supreme happiness, Parama Sukha, yields the happiness of the many folk, Bahujana Sukha. In sum, Buddhism is a system of developing happiness. It is a religion of happiness. 11.12, Appendix 1. Paired sets of happiness. These paired sets of happiness are presented in the Anguttara Nikaya. Number 1, happiness of householders, Gahi Sukha, happiness of lay people, and happiness of renunciants, Pabajita Sukha, Pabaja Sukha, happiness of the renunciate life. Number 2, sense pleasure, Kama Sukha, and happiness of renunciation, Nikkama Sukha, happiness resulting from a freedom from sensuality and an absence of greed. Number 3, happiness adulterated by suffering, Upadi Sukha, happiness in the 3 planes of existence, Tebhu Maka equals mundane happiness, minus or dash Lokya Sukha, and happiness unadulterated by suffering. Nirupadi Sukha equals transcendent happiness, dash or minus Lokya Lokutara Sukha. Number 4, happiness leading to mental taints, Sava Sukha, and happiness not leading to mental taints, Anasava Sukha, happiness free from mental taints. 5, material happiness, Samisa Sukha, happiness dependent on enticements and on consumable objects, carnal pleasure, and non-material happiness, Niramisa Sukha, happiness independent of things to consume. Number 6, happiness of the noble ones, Arya Sukha, and happiness of ordinary unawakened people, Anarya Sukha. Number 7, physical pleasure, Kaika Sukha, and mental pleasure, Chittasika Sukha. Number 8, happiness combined with bliss, Sapitika Sukha, happiness in the first and second jhana, and happiness not combined with bliss, Nipitaka Sukha, happiness in the third and fourth jhana. 9, delightful happiness, Sata Sukha. The commentaries state that this refers to the happiness in the first 3 jhanas and happiness resulting from equanimity, Upekkha Sukha, happiness when the mind is in a complete state of balance, is neutral and objective, ready to discern the truth and discriminates correctly, just as a wise person would observe events from a distance. The commentaries state that this refers to the happiness in the 4th jhana. Number 10, happiness resulting from concentration, Samadhi Sukha, either access or attainment concentration, and happiness without concentration, Asamadhi Sukha. Number 11, happiness arising for one who contemplates the first 2 jhanas, comprised of bliss, Sabitikaramana Sukha, and happiness arising for one who contemplates the 3rd and 4th jhanas, divested of bliss, Nipitikaramana Sukha. Number 12, happiness arising for one who contemplates the first 3 jhanas, comprised of pleasure, Sataramana Sukha, and happiness arising for one who contemplates the 4th jhana, comprised of equanimity, Upekaramana Sukha. 13, happiness with materiality as its foundation, Rupa Ramana Sukha, happiness with the fine material jhanas as its foundation, and happiness with immateriality as its foundation, Arupa Ramana Sukha, happiness with the formless jhanas as its foundation. After each of these pairs, there is the statement that the latter kind of happiness is superior or more excellent than the former. 11.13, Appendix 2, Threefold Happiness, Alternative Model. The Samyutta Nikaya contains another classification of happiness that is very similar to the one discussed at the beginning of this chapter, Kama Sukha, Jhana Sukha, and Nirodha Samapatti Sukha. This is likewise a threefold division. Number 1, happiness dependent on material things, Samisa Sukha. This is equivalent to sense pleasure, Kama Sukha. Number 2, non-material happiness, Niramisa Sukha. This refers to the happiness of the first 3 jhanas. And number 3, happiness exceeding and transcending non-material happiness, Niramisatara Sukha. This refers to the happiness and joy experienced by one whose mind is free from mental taints, Kinnasava, who reflects on the mind liberated from greed, hatred, and delusion. The commentaries claim that although the third kind of happiness is technically mundane, lokiya, it can be described as the happiness resulting from an arhat's knowledge of reviewing, pachavikananyana. It is superior to the second kind of happiness, which may be either mundane or transcendent, lokutara. It is transcendent when it refers to the jhana of an awakened person. These 2 classifications of happiness are almost the same because they have a similarity in scope. Samisa Sukha is equivalent to Kama Sukha. Niramisa Sukha is part of the domain of Jhana Sukha. Niramisatara Sukha goes beyond or transcends Jhana Sukha. The important difference between these 2 classifications is that the first group, Kama Sukha, Jhana Sukha, and Nirodha Samapatti Sukha, encompasses all forms of happiness, both that which is a sensation, Vedana, and that which is not. The factors of the second group, Samisa Sukha, Niramisa Sukha and Niramisatara Sukha, however, are all included in happiness that is a sensation. Therefore, the highest form of non-material happiness, Niramisa Sukha, which is part of the third jhana, does not cover all forms of jhana sukha. In reference to the fourth jhana, the distinctive term Niramisa Upekkha is used. At SIV 237, this term is also used in reference to formless jhanas, arupa jhana, because technically they are part of the fourth jhana. A clear distinction can be made between Nirodha Samapatti Sukha and Niramisatara Sukha. Although Nirodha Samapatti Sukha goes beyond jhana, it still pertains to a meditative attainment, Samapatti, and it is only accessible by those arhats and non-returners proficient in the 8 jhanas. Niramisatara Sukha here refers to the happiness resulting from the knowledge of reviewing. It refers only to arhats who can either be those liberated both ways, ubhatohaga vimutta, or those liberated by wisdom, panya vimutta, i.e., they have not reached the 8 concentrative attainments. In any case, by focusing on the literal meaning of the term, Nirodha Samapatti Sukha should in some respects also be classified as a happiness exceeding non-material happiness. 11.14, Appendix 3, Threefold Happiness, Sense Pleasure, Divine Happiness, and the Happiness of the Destruction of Craving. Sense pleasure has already been described at length. Divine happiness is defined in the commentaries as the happiness of jhana, specifically the happiness of mundane, concentrative absorption, lokiya jhana sukha. The commentaries equate divine happiness with jhanic happiness because they determine jhana to be a divine abiding, dibba vihara, in accord with a teaching in the Digha Nikaya. The commentary to the Digha Nikaya states that divine happiness refers to the 8 concentrative attainments. The ordinary celestial pleasures of divine beings is already included in the factor of sense pleasure. Happiness of the destruction of craving, tanhakaya sukha, refers to the happiness of nibbana sukha, as the term tanhakaya is a synonym for nibbana. The commentary of the Udana, however, interprets Tanhakaya Sukha to be the happiness of fruition attainment, Phala Samapatti Sukha, which is accessible to all awakened beings from stream enters upwards through establishing Nibbana as one's object of meditation. Here, I use the term Tanhakaya Sukha in a broad sense, encompassing the happiness of fruition attainment, the happiness of attainment of cessation, Nirodha Samapatti, a state resembling Nibbana, and the happiness of liberation, Vimutti Sukha, which is frequently referred to in the scriptures. Vimutti Sukha refers to the highest fruition attainment, Phala Samapatti, which is the domain of arhats. This classification is similar to the tenfold classification of happiness above. The most detailed classifications of happiness in the commentaries is found in the commentary to the Anguttara Nikaya, which divides happiness into 7 levels: human happiness, Manusa Sukha; divine happiness, Divya Sukha; jhanic happiness, the happiness of insight, Vipassana Sukha; the happiness of the path, Magga Sukha; fruition happiness, Phala Sukha; and the happiness of Nibbana. These 7 kinds of happiness can be condensed into 4. Sense pleasure, Kama Sukha, including human happiness and divine happiness, the latter referring specifically to the pleasure experienced by celestial beings or the happiness of heaven. Then there's the happiness of jhana, Jhana Sukha; the happiness of mundane concentrative attainments, Lokaya Jhana Sukha, Lokya Samapatti Sukha. In some places, this is referred to as divine happiness, Divya Sukha, in the sense of being a divine abiding, Dibba Vihara. Happiness of insight meditation, Vipassana Sukha. This appears clearly as one of the 10 imperfections of insight. vipassanupakilesa. Transcendent happiness, Lokuttara Sukha, path happiness, Magga Sukha, fruition happiness, Phala Sukha, and the happiness of Nibbana. The term Phala Sukha includes Phala Samapatti Sukha, which itself incorporates Vimutti Sukha as well. And there's a footnote on that, footnote 101. According to UDA 34 PSA 268 and VISM 700, Phala Samapatti Sukha is a form of transcendent happiness. 11.15, Appendix 4, Temporary Ordination. In Thailand, there's a custom referred to as ordination for study. Besides providing an opportunity to those who are prepared to train themselves in order to experience more refined forms of happiness, this kind of ordination is a way of providing an education to the wider population by offering a training to young people in the areas of academic knowledge, ethics, and cultural traditions. It is a rite of passage, a means for preparing people to enter society as adults. Most of these individuals are ordained while still young. In the case of novice monks, they are still children, and do so because of the wishes of their guardians. After they have been ordained and received an adequate level of training, they can voluntarily decide by themselves whether to continue as monks or to return to the householder's life with the full acceptance by the wider society. During the time of being ordained, these individuals are aware that they have entered a system of training. If they are not really dedicated to this way of life, they can train for a short period of time and then stop. This way, they can accept the conditions for what they are. Some of these individuals who are not prepared for a long-term commitment to the renunciate life may devote themselves earnestly to the training for a fixed period of time. Training with this kind of acceptance can lead to good results. It prevents the harm of feeling that one is subject to compulsion or confinement, which would lead to a struggle against the form. If there are disadvantages to this kind of training, they are minimized. If one wishes to preserve this kind of ordination for study, then one must give people the freedom and liberty to disrobe when they wish. This is fair treatment to those individuals, and it will benefit the wider society. Thus ends Chapter 11.